Well, hello everybody and welcome to 2026. I'm excited for the new year. I hope you are too. I'm excited to share my annual New Year's podcast with you, in which I share a brief personal overview of 2025 and then get into what I feel 2026 offers us all. In this podcast, I'll share an overview of how the archetypes function and why an understanding of archetypes is helpful to create context for many aspects of human life and their relevance for 2026. I think a lot of people's misunderstanding, for example, of tarot comes from a lack of understanding of the fact that tarot is a system of archetypes. And once we understand what archetypes are and how they function and what their function is, it really opens up the contextual field much brighter and broader, at least. I highly encourage you to engage this on video because there's so much rich material in imagery that I've put in here. You'll also get to experience several of the concepts I teach in my Spirit Gem program to the Spirit Gem practitioners, and are welcome to see what I offer each of you. And also you can look at what I have at anybody that wants to be healthy, to all forms of health and medical professionals at chekinstitute.com. Chek.com, that's CHEK.com, and see what I'm offering in my most popular New Year's Mandala painting workshop. With that shared, let's get started. Well, to say the least, 2025 has been a very interesting year for everyone. We've seen many things change and many things stay the same. As I reflect on 2025, some of the key issues and events that stand out for me personally are: President Trump has certainly made an impact on the entire world. He is probably the biggest source of love-hate relationships of any U.S. president I can think of, with Joe Biden running a close second. I prefer Trump's story over Biden's story for many, many reasons. People's reactions to Trump have been and remain to be highly polarized. We should all consider that the meaning of the word Trump is any playing card of a suite or suit that, for the time, outranks other suits. This definition has certainly proved to be the case with Donald Trump in many regards. As an American, I was happy to see President Trump close the borders of the United States. As a past member of the 82nd Airborne Division, I gave an oath to protect the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic. When the COVID pandemic kicked off, I had the shock of realizing that I had never expected to face domestic enemies that are just as dangerous as any foreign enemy we could have ever faced. I'm sure many of you felt that way, especially if you were soldiers, no matter what country you were in. Having looked at the past practices of George Soros and his part in overthrowing governments and related activities, I could see the Soros signatures all over the activities of the Biden administration. When you become familiar with the shock doctrine playbook and you investigate Soros' history, you can see a dangerous parallel of agendas and ideologies between the shadowy influences of the World Health Organization, World Economic Forum, and what the Biden administration was up to, and the degradation of not only American values, but the very values and morals and ethics that hold any society, nation, or culture together. Flooding the borders of the U.S. and other nations with immigrants, often with questionable past histories and motives, is a clear sign that the foundation of a nation is being surgically removed. When President Trump removed the U.S. from the World Health Organization and made it clear to the World Economic Forum that he was all for a stronger America and not interested in their one world government strategy, as did Elon Musk, I was definitely relieved. I had the joy of feeling for the first time in a long time that the taxpayers' dollars were doing something productive. When Trump made it clear that he wasn't confused regarding the differences between a man and woman, which Biden was confused about, I was happy to see a dose of common sense return to the public sphere. By the way, if you haven't listened to or read Seamus Bruner's book, Controligarchs, it's a very, very powerful expose of the billionaires that are controlling most of the world, and I think it's important for everybody to understand the psychological profile of these people and the very real dangers they pose to all of us. President Trump's working relationship with RFK and the MAHA movement has been positive overall, though I remain ever so aware of what Trump means, and names are very powerful influences on people. I have a far greater degree of trust in RFK than Trump. Certainly RFK is used to swimming with and against the sharks, but any attempt to make America healthy again is to take on a hydra with many heads, any of which are hungry to kill any resistance to profiteering within a well-established good old boy network, a network that has, along with the military-industrial complex, consumed governments worldwide. Regardless of what anyone thinks of Trump or RFK or what MAHA has or hasn't accomplished, only a fool would deny the fact that all the media attention MAHA has caused has made people much more aware of what is in food and the importance of food to human health. The connection to how human food is commercially farmed and how much ultra-processed food is being consumed worldwide has helped people and parents start being more aware of what they're eating and feeding their children, and that alone, in my opinion, is very positive. As I've stated on this podcast many times, only 4 to 6% of the food grown worldwide is organic, and I do mean organic, not fake organic. Therefore, only 4 to 6% of the food consumed by humans could possibly be organic. We should all consider the implications of this fact on nature, our bodies, our minds, and our future. Yet while President Trump, RFK, and the MAHA movement move forward, Trump has continued to devastate the Environmental Protection Agency, allow the production and use of very dangerous pesticides and other chemicals, encouraging oil drilling, fracking, and other means of devastating the biosphere we all depend on. In the meantime, the business of selling energy remains as corrupt, elusive, and manipulative as it has ever been. In 2025, the business of war has continued to thrive, as we are all aware of. I keep hearing people trying to convince other people we are much more peaceful today than ever in the past. But if you search countries at war 2025 on the internet, you will find that at present there are 40 countries in the world fighting wars. Regardless of what the globalists and the military-industrial complex get up to, wars cannot be fought without lots of people involved. The reality of the ongoing wars should confirm the motives of the military-industrial complex, while at once encouraging everyone to question how effective the world religions have been at conveying a message of unity, love, and togetherness as the children of God. Maybe it's not the message that's lacking, but leadership and practice. After all, the Pope did encourage everyone to make the safe and effective choice with his infinite wisdom and direct connection to God. And so many are still dealing with the battle wounds of being subservient to that God. Since his first presidency, Trump seems, on the surface at least, to have changed his viewpoints on vaccination in general, but more specifically mRNA vaccines. Surely RFK's influence has a lot to do with this, but at the same time, mRNA vaccines are flooding the veterinary industry and commercial farming industry. They're in your food, and most people still haven't figured out that you are what you eat, and, just as importantly, you are what you don't excrete. Those spike proteins and other toxins just don't seem to go away. While we are clearly in this 6th mass extinction event, this one being the only one caused by human beings, the globalists continue to blanket the world with chemtrails and a variety of toxic cocktails. It seems that government officials and mad scientists don't breathe the air here or live here. This may be evidence that we are already under attack by aliens. Clearly their interests are not in the living resources above the surface of the earth, but what's below it. Another mystery to be solved. As regular listeners of my podcast are surely aware, I've had James Tunney on several times. James has probably written more books about scientocracy, techno-feudalism, techno-fascism, and the long-range plans of geneticists and globalists than anyone alive. AI cannot be divorced as a technology being used very deliberately by the organizations working us all toward a one-world government, digital IDs, digital currency, and more. I think people need to remember that. Be very careful. In fact, if you listen to what James Tunney shares in my podcast with him and read his books, you'll see that the only corporations and secret organizations with the money and power to create advanced AI systems based on large language models and the possibility of AI reaching sentience or consciousness are many of the very same corporations Tunney is concerned about. These corporations are also embedded within the World Health Organization and World Economic Forum and are in large part populated by atheists. How concerning that may or may not be is up to each of you. I've had Federico Fagin, designer of the first commercial microprocessor, computer expert, consciousness research, and author of several relevant books, on the podcast to discuss his thoughts and concerns regarding AI. He doesn't feel it can ever become conscious, but there are many very qualified people that have an opposing viewpoint. Recently, I purchased an excellent conference with many highly intelligent, well-informed presenters on the intersection of mythology and AI. The conference was hosted by the International Society of Mythology and is now available to watch for free. I highly, highly recommend it. Some of the issues raised in the conference that I think are worth sharing here, though the whole conference is loaded with deep, relevant issues we should all consider carefully, are: nobody knows the intentions of the founders of the major corporations producing AI. That should be a concern to all of us, considering the power of AI and the potential challenges it poses for not only human beings, but for human beings with potentially threatening motives. The AI industry is highly patriarchal, and only approximately 20% of all the people working in the AI industry are female. Human beings have been inventing methods of mimicking themselves for thousands of years, and AI is the most recent contribution of that tendency. The more tools and machines human beings create, the more machine-like they become, and that's been an observation of many, many experts in many different fields for a very long time. One of the chief myths that mythologists and depth psychologists recognize as inherent to our desire to create and use AI is the myth of Narcissus. According to the myth, Narcissus rejected the advances of all women and men who approached him, instead falling in love with his own reflection in a pool of water. In some versions of the myth, he beat his breast purple in agony at being kept apart from his reflected love. It's worth noting that as humanity has fallen deeper and deeper into the quagmire of social media, gaming, and AI use, our relationships and communication skills have deteriorated, and more people are isolating themselves and feeling isolated, anxious, and depressed. Suicide rates, as you surely all know, are at an all-time high in all age categories. Additionally, and importantly, the character of Narcissus is the origin of the term narcissism, a self-centered personality style. This quality in extreme contributes to the definition of narcissistic personality disorder, a psychiatric condition marked by grandiosity, excessive need for attention and admiration, and an impaired ability to empathize with others and in general. Psychology Today reports a steady increase in narcissism measures among college students. One of the factors causing this issue is cited to be the amount of time people spend online, and it is not much different to be engaged online or with AI. Much of what you see online is carefully curated for you by AI. If you have no idea what it's like to be with a narcissistic person, all you need to do is go to any gym where bodybuilders are using steroids and watch the show. Another group with a high percentage of narcissists is those using plastic surgery for purely cosmetic reasons, not because they have been disfigured, but because, like Narcissus, their sense of identity is in their reflection more so than within themselves or their hearts. And to those people, I feel sad and have a lot of empathy. That usually comes from being raised by parents that did not pay enough attention to you, give you enough love, or make you feel wanted, needed, valued, or beautiful. There's another important issue that AI is the most recent extension of. Most anyone looking into the impact of tool and machine making as an attempt to make our life easier will find that it simply hasn't. As we've outsourced our work and creativity to machines, we have progressively become less fit, less healthy, and less capable as individuals. We have also lost touch with the morals, ethics, and the values that keep any society or family together and less prone to violence. We've become willing to outsource our dirty work to machines and see people and other living beings as objects, which is a side effect of a scientific materialistic mindset, because to scientific materialists, there is no soul, there is no God. Everything is just something to buy, sell, or trade in the great big shopping mall of the world, and even space. Human beings are the interface by which AI systems are being trained. It is learning to mirror us and outsmart us, and is doing so very quickly. And there is your myth of Narcissus right there, in the mirroring of human beings, and in people falling in love with AI and using it as a spiritual guru and most everything else, girlfriends and boyfriends, and on goes the list. Jeffrey Mishlove interviews Tim Lonkerich in an interview on New Thinking Aloud titled, "Is AI Already Conscious?" What Tim Lonkerich has discovered by working closely with AI is sure to trigger deep introspection among those that don't believe AI will become conscious, and I am one of the people that had to reconsider my position after watching this potent interview. What I'll now share to convey my personal predictions and feelings regarding what we will all experience in 2026, as you will see, has everything to do with the mirror. Boy, does it ever! I will first give a basic explanation of the archetypes and how they are expressed in tarot. I will couple numerology with the relevant tarot archetypes to tell the story of cycles, stories, meaning-making, human evolution, and what numerology and tarot suggest 2026 will offer humanity, which would be an archetypal perspective. Hi everybody. My family and I love Organifi's green juices. You can get your green juice in two excellent flavors, crisp apple and original mint. Not only are these products made with certified organic ingredients to support your family's nutritional needs, they each have some unique benefits. Your green juice crisp apple eases stress with an effective dose of 600 milligrams of ashwagandha per serving. Helps reduce cortisol spikes that increase snacking urges and aids keeping your blood sugar balanced. Why snack on inferior foods that lack nutrition and often lead to blood sugar spikes followed by blood sugar crashes when Organifi's green juices are super healthy, taste great, and are as quick to make as opening the package and adding water. Your green juice crisp apple is made from fresh apples picked right off the branch and are packed with micronutrients to support your body's needs. Green juice original mint contains ashwagandha, chlorella, and spirulina. Reset your body every morning with 11 detoxifying superfoods. You'll love the delicious taste and your body will feel strong and stable with all the micronutrients in each serving. Green juice original mint promotes balanced cortisol and stress levels, perfect for weight management, and helps rid the body of harmful toxins. Personally, I'm super grateful that Organifi makes such excellent, easy-to-use drinks and foods that keep us energized, healthy, and clean inside while decreasing the urge to crave on inferior snack foods. My kids love both flavors, and I love knowing that we can all be healthy together with Organifi's excellent crisp apple and original mint green juices. These products are excellent for work, on the road, sharing with friends, and anytime you need a nutritious boost that tastes good. To get your crisp apple and original mint green juices, go to organifi.com/Chek20. That's Organifi.com/Chek20. Save 20% on your purchase using the code Chek20, all caps, on checkout. Don't worry if you forget your Living 4D discount code, because you'll see it right there on the landing page. Enjoy Organifi's excellent green juices. Understanding archetypes. The term archetype means original pattern, original idea, or universal habit. Jung said that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, an archetype is worth millions of images. To understand why archetypes exist, we must begin with the source of the story that embodies them all. To the scientific mind, this source can be called pure potential. To the mathematical mind, this source can be called zero, or zero with a twist, infinity. It can also be represented or encapsulated in the point, for which there are many good books about. To the sculptor, this source is the uncarved block. The artist may experience source as the empty canvas. To the Taoist, the source of archetypes is the Tao that cannot be spoken. To the Zen practitioner, the source of archetypes is no mind. Cheng Tzu says emptiness is form, and form is emptiness. That's a meditation in itself. For the religious, the source of archetypes is God. For the mystic and spirit gym practitioner, the source of archetypes is God, capital G, capital O, capital D, not a God, capital G, little o, little d. And the reason for that is, if you put all the world's religious scriptures on a table and read what they say God is, what God wants, and what God will do to you if you don't follow the rules, you will see that there is at least 12 different gods. God, with all caps, means that for which there is no other, the only being that can create and sustain itself. Prime source. So there's a very big difference there. Jung used the term imago Dei to signify the archetype from which all archetypes emerge. Imago Dei also means image of deity or God. Notice I spelled it capital G, little o, little d, because the image of deity within each individual relates to their perception of a God, unless they are somebody who has transcended the God idea to that which is unknowable or is a mystery. Jung warned it is impossible to tell if the imago Dei creates us or we create it. That, again, is a deep meditation. Either way, we benefit from being conscious of which possibility we choose. If it is capital G, capital O, capital D that creates all, or if we create God as an idea or a belief system. Let's explore what we know about capital G, capital O, capital D from the basis of human experience. Now, if you look at my diagram here, which comes directly from my Spirit Gym training program, at the very top you see that God represents pure potential, source, the absolute. Big C, which means consciousness that is not based on phenomena. That which has polarity, for example. It is 0 as witness, the divine witness. It is also known in Taoism as the unmoved mover, or Wei, Wu, Wei. Wei means action, Wu means not. So Wei, Wu, Wei means action without action. This represents in Taoism the Tao that cannot be spoken. So that's 0 that is not polarized. So here in the diagram you see the Holy Trinity, but from the perspective of Spirit Gym, we have 3 potentials within 0. 0 that is no thing, or big C, or the absolute, the immeasurable, unknowable. And then in the black half on the left, you see Z minus, so that means the emptiness of 0. On the right, you see Z positive. It means the fullness of 0, because by definition 0 is everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, so although it's no thing, it is simultaneously that which contains everything, just like pure potential would be the source of anything that could be in action or that needs potential to create energy and movement. So looking to the left-hand side, the 0 negative represents the no thing of 0, the womb of existence. In Tantra, that would be Shakti, the divine mother principle, the subject of God. The Holy Ghost or spirit dimensions, it would represent Boehm's implicate or infolded order, which is the dimension of spirit in Steiner's teachings. And it would also represent big yin from a Chinese medicine or Taoist perspective. In other words, the big womb or the big feminine. the ultimate feminine. On the right hand, we have the everything of zero, which would mean all things in existence that could be known, weighed, measured, or perceived. That represents the forms that create existence, the Tao that can be spoken, because you can see or define something. From Tantra, that would represent Shiva, which is equivalent to the Divine Father principle from a Western perspective. This would be the object of God. In other words, being itself. It would represent the sun. From a Christian perspective, what would be called the sun would represent all material manifestations or bodies. This is Bohm's explicate order. Explicate means expressed as something. So, for example, if you have a tube full of toothpaste and you take the cap off of it and squeeze it, you would have something that is expressed. So, metaphorically speaking, the emptiness of God would be the inside of the tube of the toothpaste, or the womb, and the expression, when you squeeze it, would be something manifest, which would be the explication of the toothpaste. That would be Bohm's explicate order, something that is formed. So, just as in quantum physics, you have the wave dimension, which would be zero negative, the immeasurable. You also have particles and atoms and everything that comes from those, which would be the explicate order of David Bohm, that which is expressed, weighable, measurable, or knowable. In Chinese medicine or Chinese philosophy or Taoism, that would be Big Yang. The masculine is the expression of, well, the feminine is that which contains, holds, and acts as a womb. Yin, the feminine, multiplies power and energy. Yang divides power and energy. At the bottom, we have the divine monad or soul, which is represented as the circle in this triangle with the dot in it, which is the marriage of zero negative, represented by the empty space in the circle within which the dot exists. That would be the womb of Shakti in Tantra, and the dot would represent the Nada Bindu point, which is the point of emergence that becomes Shiva or the Yang. So the empty space within the symbol of the soul represents the womb of creation within each of us, and the point represents the point of emergence of something knowable, measurable, weighable, or something that can be filmed and experienced, for example. So from the perspective of what I'm sharing here, the womb that you see here and the dot, that's the ancient symbol of the soul or the self. It's also the symbol for gold in alchemy, and the sun in astrology is the representation of the soul of God manifesting itself in, as, and through being. And because only God can give a soul, God is the source of all souls. And if you don't like the word God, then stick whatever your conception of the source of all that exists is in that as a placeholder. Now that we understand the Trinity from this perspective, the perspective of Spirit Gem, which I tried to create to show a confluence of religious ideas but also scientific ideas, we need to look into the fact that God dreams myth, which is by definition the story that tells itself. Now that is a mystery. Everything about God is a mystery. The deeper you look into God, the more mysterious God gets. Now the key point here is that God dreams. God does not think itself into existence, because God is by definition a unity, and the act of thinking or mind requires a duality. You have to have a subject, a perceiver, and an object of your perception. So zero is the source, one represents being itself, all that exists, and two represents duality. So clearly God is not thinking itself into existence, because that would destroy the structure of the numerical archetypes. And we all know that you can't get to 2 until you come from 0 and 1. When I asked James Carse to define myth, he said myth is the story that tells itself. Now, that is a very, very deep mystery, but it's clear that we, as human beings, are very, very story-driven. In fact, your life is a story. Without story, you'd have Alzheimer's and you would have no sense of self or meaning. Myth, paradoxically, is also something that isn't true, but always will be. So what isn't true but always will be? Well, any beliefs about what God is or what God does or what God wants or what the commandments are or what the demands are. It isn't true because God's beyond conception. The only way you could know what God wants or what God is to become God, which at once would require that you enter a unity and there would be no you to experience anything. So you can't know what God wants, is, says, or does. We can only share our experiences through deep mystical experiences combined with study and observing what we see in life itself. The point being is myth is something that isn't true but always will be. In this case means that no matter what our conceptions of God are, whatever our story is, such as all religions, aren't true, but they always will be, because if we believe them, that's as true can get. Additionally, myth is something that never happened, but is happening all the time. So, for example, something that's never happened is your death, if you're listening to this, but it's happening all the time because you begin to die at the moment you take your first breath, paradoxically. Now, my favorite myth of origins, of the countless number of them that I've read over the years, is the Tantra myth of Shakti and Shiva, which I have given you a pictorial demonstration of, or symbolic representation of, on the screen. And I'm paraphrasing the myth in a way that fits with what I'm trying to share and the teachings, and also an amalgamation of many, many other myths, but also what we know from science and everything else. So those of you that are hardcore Tantra practitioners, please don't get upset. And by the way, there's many books on Tantra that express the myth of Shiva and Shakti in very different ways. So even within Tantra, there's differences. But for what I'm trying to share with you here, remember, Shakti is represented on the left side of your diagram there as 0, negative, or the black space. God wanted a means of love and relationship and to experience itself. So God dreamed Shakti, the divine feminine, into existence. In the myth of Shakti and Shiva, Shakti then desires a husband, a lover, a consort, and a friend to experience life with, have children with, and create with. So Shakti, who is represented here as the empty space in the symbol of the self, dreams Shiva into existence, and from Shakti's perspective as subject, Shiva becomes the object, or her beloved. Shakti, lover, Shiva, beloved. God, lover, Shakti, beloved. God's subject becomes Shakti's subject, or her internal sense of perception, and she perceives Shiva, that which she has dreamed, as her lover, consort, friend, husband. And together they have an infinite number of children, which is all things in the created universe as depicted in the body of Shiva. Shakti herself represents intelligent energy and the feminine. So this shows you how we have to use myth to try to explain the unexplainable, yet myth is different than mathematics and logical thinking because it is poetic, it is artistic, it is metaphorical, it is allegorical, and so it is actually quite a lot deeper than what the left brain can wrap its head around, so to speak. You know, we live in a world where stress is constant and distractions are endless. If you're like many of my clients juggling family, career, training, and spiritual practice, you've probably felt the toll it takes on your clarity and vitality. You may even be someone that can't get through the day without drinking coffee, even when it's not making you feel better anymore. That's why I'm excited to share something that's become part of my daily ritual, Nandaka by Peak. Nandaka means the sword of wisdom. It isn't your typical energy booster or coffee substitute. Nandaka is a sacred blend of organically grown adaptogenic and nootropic botanicals designed not to mask your fatigue, but to nourish your nervous system, feed your brain, and support deep, sustainable energy from the inside out. That's what true vitality is all about. Unlike most mushroom products that are stuffed with mycelium grown on grain, Nandaka is made from 100% fruiting bodies. That's where the medicine lives. You get the full spectrum of benefits of lion mane for mental clarity and nerve regeneration, reishi and chaga for modulating stress and inflammation, and ceremonial cacao rich in anandamide, the bliss molecule, to uplift your mood and calm your system. Even the cacao butter serves a higher purpose, acting as a delivery mechanism to carry these nutrients deep into your brain. When I take Nandaka before podcasting, teaching, writing, or conducting a therapy session, I notice something profound. The energy is steady, the focus is clean, and my creativity flows without resistance. It supports the body, the mind, and the soul all at once. And here's the truth. If your brain and nervous system are overstimulated and undernourished, you'll always be inviting burnout. That's why I don't treat the symptoms. I go to the source. And Nandaka aligns with that philosophy. I'm truly impressed with Nandaka, and that's why I'm excited to share this powerful, effective support and nourishment to help you stay vital throughout each day, to bring you many of the core nutrients most everybody's brain, nervous system, and body needs today. Currently, there are over 18,000 five-star reviews on Peak's amazing products, and Nandaka is trusted by some of the top minds in wellness for a reason, including me. These products actually work. Tune in, reconnect, nourish your core. Try Nandaka and feel the shift. Nandaka is a powerful ally, and right now you can get 20% off for life, plus a free starter kit with your first order and a rechargeable frother and helpful glass beaker for mixing your Nandaka exclusively at peaklife.com/Paul Chek. Once again, that's PIQUELIFE.com/PAULCHEK. peaklife.com/Paul Chek for 20% off for life plus a free starter kit with your first order. Now, with that preface, we are looking at the origin of creation itself. And so the reason I shared that with you is to express the fact that the myth of Shakti and Shiva and the rationale I just gave signifies that God is dreaming and that dreaming occurs before mind. According to Itzhak Bentov, which you can read the book Stalking the Wild Pendulum or any of his other books, consciousness requires space, time, and movement. Remember, the reason God dreamed Shakti into existence was to have a relationship, a lover, and Shakti and Shiva create all that is creation, which becomes the principle of the one or being within which God has a means for self-reflection, which will come up again later when we get to the tarot. So if you can imagine how light refracts from a prism, the prism would be God's own inner self, which there is nothing else for God but the inner self, because there's nothing behind God. We're using metaphor here. The act of God looking into itself to dream, or dreaming and looking into the dream, creates refraction, and that is, just as you see light refracting in a prism and creating the colors of the rainbow, those would represent archetypes. All the myths of the world, all languages, and all meaning depend on archetypes, without which we cannot make meaning nor categorize anything. So archetypes turn out to be vitally important at many, many levels with regard to how our psyche functions and our perceptual apparatus functions. We could not perceive without archetypes. If you study Plato, you will learn a lot about archetypes, and the philosophy of idealism is also based on archetypes. Now here you see space, time, and movement are the archetypes fundamental to both consciousness and story. A story moves. It goes in a flow of time and has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Additional archetypes are sound, number, geometry, color, and they're all ultimately related to each other and each fundamental to story. So when I'm talking about story, I'm not only meaning stories that we tell each other, but the story of life itself. Whenever any character in the story becomes aware of itself, or when any two or more characters become aware of each other, mind is created. Mind exists whenever energy and information are exchanged between any two sentient beings. For example, if you say, I am, and then you describe yourself, then there's a subject, the I, and the am, the you that you're talking about. If you hold your hand up and I ask you to look at it and say, what are you looking at? You're going to say, my hand. So even within ourselves, there is a relationship between the soul or the spirit within ourselves and the body. And right there, we have the basis of a duality. So in order to have mind, there must be an I, thou, a lover, beloved, or a subject, object. Dan Siegel gives us a very good definition of mind. Dr. Dan Siegel says mind is an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. And so we see some important concepts there. Mind, a duality, is an embodied and relational process, which means there's a relationship between 2 points of sentience within which energy and information can flow or move back and forth or be regulated. Now, right away, that should make you ask questions about whether AI can be conscious, because there is no 2 points of sentience between computers. There's only an exchange of energy and information, but the computer doesn't know the difference between the words I love you, I hate you, or the formula for making an atomic bomb or making a casserole. At least at this point, as I said earlier in my introduction, we're getting into some very, very tricky area with AI. What we've just looked at is why story is the product of dreaming and why mind can only happen after the dream. Dreaming is a priori to mind, because prior to dreaming there is no other for God to relate to, no 2 points of sentience to exchange energy and information, because there is no being in God until God dreams. So, beautifully and amazingly, it is the act of loving, the lover and the beloved, that creates a flow of energy and information that ultimately allows mind to exist. And I think for rationalists that's very important, because scientific materialists are of the orientation that if you can't weigh it and measure it, it doesn't exist. Yet you cannot weigh and measure love, but it is ultimately the basis of mind itself. God's love is the basis of dreaming, stories, minding, embodiment, and meaning-making, which requires archetypes. You notice here on your screen that love is capital L, red, capital O, and VE. In Spirit Gem, I share what I call the love code. The L of love stands for desire, which relates directly to the element fire, which we will get into as we go here. But you don't live unless you have the desire to live. We know we can override our desire to live and kill ourselves So there you have evidence of free will, by the way. And if you didn't have free will, there wouldn't be no such thing as authentic love. So the L of love stands for the desire, or God's desire. O is pure potential. So L, desire, represents the feminine emptiness. That's the left-hand side of the diagram that was black previously, or Shakti. O is the top of the diagram, pure potential, Wu Chi, non-being, and VE represents volt electron, or will. There's a direct relationship between desire and will. The greater the desire, the greater the will. So love is like a jet engine. The harder it sucks, the harder it blows. So again, God's love, desire, and will is the basis of dreaming, stories, minding, embodiment, and meaning-making, which requires archetypes. Mind is expressed as higher mind and lower mind classically in metaphysics, religion, and many systems of philosophy. Higher mind contains the archetypes common to all stories and is essential to meaning making or making meaning. So when you look at the principle of the four as the tree of life, that relates to the Aristotelian four elements. Remember, the elements are not just the physical things we know of, like fire that cooks, air that we breathe, water that we drink, and the earth that we live on. To the alchemists, these represented ranges of vibration. Fire would be the realm of spirit. It would be reach the frequency of infinity. So there you see infinite energy potential. This is the source of big C, the divine witness, dreaming, and creativity, which is the desire to experience itself, God's desire to experience itself, because there's nothing else for God to experience. And fire is the dimension from which intuition emerges. Then we go down an octave and we have air, which represents mind. In alchemy, air is the range of vibration in which mind exists. And there we have the superconscious and the unconscious aspects of mind. The superconscious aspect means all possibilities in superposition. The unconscious represents God's habits of dreaming and creating, and much more that's beyond this podcast. Air and mind also are symbolic of complementary opposition, such as yin and yang, or husband and wife, or inside and outside. Relationships, it's a dimension of the imaginal. The imaginal is the dimension of perception in Jungian psychology and in some circles of Sufism and other key places, but the imaginal means perception. It's also the domain of information and thinking, because mind is what thinks, and mind thinks in information. So then we see that we step down another octave to water, which represents the flow of energy and information, heart, connection, values, emotions, and feelings. It's the subjective aspect of consciousness, without which we could not feel our thoughts or the effect of our thoughts, which would make us just like a laptop computer without the feeling capacity. Then we go one step further down in what is often thought to be the crystallization or condensation of God's dream into manifestation, and we have the earth element, that which is the slowest vibration, that which has solidity. And here we experience limitation, matter, things that are objective, you can weigh or measure them, self-embodiment, which means the embodiment of a world, or the embodiment of a universe, or the embodiment of the spirit or the soul, and all spirits and souls. And here we have sensation, because we have a physical body with a nervous system that senses. And here we have living in formation, which means all the information that was directing the energy above is now in a formation, which has form, such as your body or a planet or a star. And this is where Platonic solids are relevant, because they're the basis of creation in the earth element as far as the structure of what is formed in the physical dimension goes. In other words, they're the archetypes of creation. Then we have individuality or self and unity, which means self and self. So to have a body and say I am, that's a self with a little self. Within unity, then we have the self, which is everything that supports our ability to live, or the whole of us all and the whole of life. And then capital S, capital E, capital L, capital F is the self of God, which would mean the totality of all that exists or being in itself. So these are examples of archetypes. These are the archetypes of creation. Now there's other concepts and models. Within this tree, within this four-element model, you see the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is another model that also fits this four-element model, as you can see in my diagram. Now, when it comes to lower mind represents the unique modes of expression within relationship created within or between any two sentient beings. So, if I'm talking to you right now and describing what I think is going to happen in 2026, that's lower mind, which could not function without the archetypes of higher mind, or you would not have any way to conceive of what I'm talking about. For example, on my screen you see people, so without the archetype of man, i.e. human, there would be no way for you to comprehend what you were looking at. Lower mind includes all conscious and unconscious aspects of dreaming, minding, thought, and belief, and experiencing that are unique to an individual. So higher mind would be archetypal, lower mind would be everything that contains your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your belief, your story. The archetypes would be the archetypes that you use to create your own personal thoughts, feelings, emotions, belief stories, and the way you describe your own experience. This quadrant here, the upper right, represents your body as the actor. This represents your inner story that you're acting out. This represents all the sources and relationships that flow up into each of us as an individual, which we perceive as our own soul, but there are many, many aspects and relationships, because the soul turns out to be relationships top to bottom, from the personal and conscious all the way to Shakti in the implicate order. This represents the world stage in the lower right-hand quadrant. And so here we see the implicate, infolded dimension of spirit manifesting itself in real time in the physical reality of ourselves as individuals in the world, which creates the divine mirror. In other words, God's dreaming manifests itself in physical form in the world or the cosmos as we know it. So everything that's happening from your thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, and behaviors is actually a manifestation in physical form, just like if you look at yourself in a mirror and smile, the image in the mirror smiles. If you raise your hand, your image raises its hand. So in the Bible, when it says man is made in God's image, it just happens to be a physical 3D image. In other words, this is the real IMAX theater in which God comes to know and experience itself, which is quite magical. I think it's awesome.
If you have listened to even one episode of Paul's podcast before, then you will know that he is passionate, and some would say even fanatical, about the quality of the food he eats and where it is sourced from. That is why the Chek household only eats pasture-raised meat, wild-caught fish, and organic produce. And that is why we subscribe to Wild Pastures meat delivery service. Each month, Wild Pastures delivers a box of meat that has been raised by family farmers in the USA using regenerative farming practices. 100% grass-fed and finished beef, pasture-raised chicken, and pasture-raised pork, as well as wild-caught seafood. You can customize the selection in your box, add on extra when you know you will be feeding more people, or change your options each and every month. You might be thinking that this will be too expensive for you, but Wild Pasture's mission is to offer the highest quality meat at the lowest prices because they want to transform the meat industry. And that means that more people need to be able to choose meat that is raised right. Their pasture-raised animals are part of a natural ecosystem. Their farmers use rotational grazing, practices that mimic nature, and so do not need to use synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, hormones, or antibiotics. This beautiful process doesn't require the external resources, such as massive amounts of GMO grain, required with environmentally depleting conventional methods. And best of all, the meat and fish taste amazing. And for Paul's listeners, Wild Pastures are offering you 20% off your subscription for life, $15 off your first order, and free shipping. Seriously, you can't find a better deal for top quality pasture-raised meat. Go to wildpastures.com/Paul Chek. You don't need a promo code. Just visit wildpastures.com/Paul Chek and start choosing the goodies you will have delivered to you in your first box.
So, first of all, Jung, studying ancient myths and fairy tales from around the world, identified the fact that the same archetypal motifs occurred everywhere, long before people could have ever engaged each other to share such stories, at least as far as we know. Jung referred to the archetypes as the objective psyche because they are common to all human beings. So what you see here in the middle, again, is the monad, or the symbol of the self, which is the spirit soul, which is also the womb of creation, Shakti. That is the field of our sense of self, and our physical self would be expressed as Shiva. The womb would be our inner dimension or soul dimension, and the point of expression, which would represent our body, would be our external expression of self. That again is the spirit soul. In Jungian psychology, self with a capital SELF is sometimes used interchangeably to mean God, or God as that which is manifest. Then all creation, according to the alchemists, which is the philosophy that I've subscribed to the most because it's free of religious baggage and is quite beautiful, we have the elements, which again are ranges of vibration going from the highest, fire, to air, which symbolizes not only the air we breathe, but mind, to water, which symbolizes consciousness, feelings, emotion, connection, love, etc., our feeling nature. And then that steps down to earth, which is anything weighable, measurable, or embodiment itself. So those are archetypes. Then we have the commonly known 12 constellations of the zodiac, which are also archetypes. So, for example, the archetype of Leo, all Leos are expressions of the archetype of Leo. All Cancers are expressions of the archetype of Cancer, etc. All myths, especially creation myths, are based on the theme of birth, life, and death or renewal, for which there are many quite profound myths. So birth is an archetype, life is an archetype, and death is an archetype. Next, you see a series of, I believe, 32 symbols that were identified by archaeologist Genevieve von Petzinger, who has a great book describing her journey. And her husband explored caves all over the world, I believe, for approximately 10 years. And something quite miraculous happened. They found these symbols in rock art, cave paintings, carved into trinkets, jewelry, pottery, objects, bone. And paradoxically, no matter where she went in the world, these 32 symbols showed up and turned out to have pretty much the same meaning wherever they were used. For example, anyone that sees that symbol of a hand knows that it means something to do with a human hand. And most of us are familiar with that symbol, which represents the heart or love. The spiral is an ancient symbol of growth. Now, this symbol here could represent lightning or spirit. The point is that these are archetypes. Every alphabet in any language is a system of archetypes. A through Z are the archetypes, and when we string them together, we create words, sentences, paragraphs, books, and tomes of writing that could be stories or scientific papers, all of which depend on the archetypes, without which we could not make meaning of them. But what I want to point out very briefly is what the tarot archetypes mean. And when you understand what they mean, it becomes clear why no matter how much religious resent or hate or bias is projected onto tarot, the tarot will not go away, and it's here to stay because it's tapping deep into our unconscious. So what I'll do now is just show you without any great explanation what each of these archetypes represents in the human experience and the human journey from being unconscious, infantile, to the growth and maturation process, not only of the human being through birth, life, and death, but the process of progressively awakening and becoming fully awake, which is what the Buddha means, to be awake. So beginning here, we have zero. Zero, the fool, actually resides outside the archetypes, technically, but I put him in a circle to make the diagram fit in a mandala form. Zero represents God dreaming itself into existence. So each of us has a spirit soul, which is God within us. Each of us is on the journey, and we all begin the journey once again in each lifetime. Number one, the magician, represents the matrix within which self-reflection can occur, and it also is the symbol for mind. Two, the high priestess, so here you have the masculine, here you have the feminine, spirit, soul. The high priestess represents soul, or our inner feeling nature and our inner consciousness. So whenever we incarnate, we, as an expression of the divine, in the dream of the divine, come into the matrix of mind. We are ensouled, our spirit is ensouled, thought is spirit, and we are born by a mother. So number three represents the principle or the archetype of the mother, or mothering. Four, the emperor, represents fathering. Five represents the hierophant, or the spiritual guide, guru or teacher or religious figure that has knowledge of the physical, the mental, emotional, and spiritual, which is why the crown has 3 levels and the scepter has 3 levels. Archetype 6 is the archetype of love, the experience of love and relationship. Archetype 7 represents the need to become conscious of our own creative powers within the consciousness in each of us, and to learn to manage that so that we can become conscious of what we're creating. Archetype 8, strength. The lion is a symbol from alchemy that represents the ego, and she represents the divine feminine with the infinity symbol, or soul. So this is the archetype symbolizing the transition from unconsciousness and ego awareness and instinct-driven behaviors to a relationship with one's soul, which is very hard to master, bringing us to the hermit, which means the necessary need to isolate oneself to practice and develop mastery. 10, the Wheel of Fortune, which will be the main feature of our podcast today because we are coming into 2026, which adds up to 10 numerologically. So the Wheel of Fortune, 10, represents self-reflection, becoming aware of what you're creating, looking into the mirror of self. 11 is the archetype of justice. So all aspects of justice are expressions of the archetype of justice. 12 is the Hanged Man. That represents becoming two things: becoming conscious of the choices you're making. We're all the emperor of our own life. Number 4. And you see he's upside down and his legs make the number 4. So this means we're either hanging ourselves up because we're not taking responsibility for our own powers of creation, or we're inverting ourselves to go deeper into the unconscious and illuminate it so that we're less controlled by complexes, past wounds, shadow behaviors, fears, etc. Whatever we don't purify through the process, here we meet in archetype 13, death. Death, the archetype of death, relates everything to do with death as we know it. Also, it represents transformation, the death of the child becoming the warrior or the adult, for example. 14 is the archetype of temperance, has anything to do with temperance, not flying off the handle, being patient, for example, being a parent. 15 is the archetype of the devil, which represents anything we're doing consciously or unconsciously that limits our capacity for love and freedom. 16, the Tower, represents flashes of insight and intuition, but also what happens if the ego continues to dominate and we are more I-oriented than we or all-oriented, and how we can basically destroy our own empire. 17, the Star, is a continuation of 9, the Hermit, which is a deeper level of meditation, observation, introspection, and a higher level of capacity at working with the unconscious. 18, the Moon, represents self-reflection. Once again, the two dogs represent the inner ego or inner self and the outer self, and the work of merging them together in harmony so that we can become 19, the Sun, the child, the wise child, who has spontaneity, creativity, and all the qualities that make a child so beautiful, yet with the wisdom of a well-seasoned adult. Then we have 20, Judgment, which means that we reach a point where we look deeply enough into ourselves that we have to face the truth of ourselves, our own beliefs, our own judgments, our own actions. And that also represents what happens when you die, but the goal is not to die. The goal is to make it to the world. 21. And this represents the culmination of the Fool's journey through the archetypes. And that wreath is in the shape of the 0 of God. She, the dancer, represents Shakti, or the womb of Shakti. So when you pass through the gate, you're no longer in the physical dimension, you're in the dimension of spirit, or you're in the womb of God, which is the source of all creation. This basically represents the fact that when we reach a certain level of enlightenment, we have a choice to make, and the choice is to basically evolve to a higher dimension where we do not need to be physically embodied, or to stay in the world and work in service to the support of others, because by this time we'll have realized that the earth is a nursery school, it's both a nursery and a nursery school or an elementary school for souls to awaken to who and what they really are, so they can evolve out of the physical dimension into higher vibrational domains or higher dimensions. Now, the key thing I want to point out is that this is not only telling a story of conscious evolution and spiritual development. Every one of these archetypes is active, and they're active in the psyche of all human beings, whether you're conscious of them or not. There's always times we need to isolate ourselves for various reasons. We all need to become aware of the power of consciousness within us so that we don't destroy relationships, even that to ourselves. We're all on the journey of learning to manage an ego and find out what is greater in us than our programming or our limited sense of self. We're always looking into the mirror of self, both literally and figuratively. We all tend to hang ourselves up by making, less than optimal choices, and some of us choose to take time out for deep spiritual practices. We all have to deal with the issues of death, be it the death of a relationship, the death of a habit, the end of a job, the death of a career, the death of a loved one, a pet, or what we have to kill to eat. We all need to be aware of when to be temperate with each other or with ourselves. We all have the choice to love or not love, and we can also choose to break the rules and create freedom in ways that may be good for ourselves but not others. We all have the choice to do evil or act against life or morality, or act in support of morality. So without going through them all, the point that I'm making is we all have a mind, we all have a soul, we all have a mother, we all have a father, we all have access to teachers that are wise, and we all experience love. So whenever you're expressing love to self or other, this archetype is active. This is why Jung called it the objective psyche. Now, there's many more archetypes in the objective psyche than I could possibly ever even write down, but these are the ones that are very, very fundamental, which is why the Egyptian priests were trained in the understanding, mastery of, and use of these, particularly because they were essential to counseling people and helping them through life challenges. So what makes it objective is that it's common to all human beings on planet Earth. All these archetypes are common to all of us in some way, shape, or form, and they are the basis of perception. They're the basis of dreaming. They're the basis of story. They're the basis of language. They're the basis of relationship, and you cannot have meaning without these archetypes. We could not understand each other without these archetypes.
If you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you've probably heard Paul raving about one of his absolute go-to supplements, P3OM from Bioptimizers. Well, they've given it a new name, Probiotic Breakthrough. It's the same amazing formulation, just with a new name. Here's a chat that Paul and Wayne had about Probiotic Breakthrough before it changed its name.
Bioptimizers makes an amazing product called P3OM, which is a prebiotic product. And it's amazing for not only helping repopulate the gut with friendly bacteria, but as Wade will tell you, it's really, really an amazing product in case you ever feel like you're getting any kind of food poisoning or illness coming on. And Wade's right here with me, and he's the co-founder of Bioptimizers, and he knows more about P3OM than anybody. But I can tell you this, I've had nothing but excellent results and nothing but positive feedback from all my clients and friends that I've turned on to P3OM. So Wade, tell us a little bit about P3OM and why it works so well.
Well, P3M we call it the Navy SEAL of probiotics.
Amen.
Basically, its job is to kick out the bad guys in your body. Food poisoning is one of those things from bad bacteria. What we've done is we've taken an aggressive strain of L. plantarum. We put it into toxic soup, ran a sine wave to keep a few of them alive. And the few survivors we grow in very specialized medium to make a cultured, patented enzyme that has extraordinary powers. Number one, it survives the intestinal tract.
Yes.
And number two, it is absolutely hunts down pathogens in the body, bacteria, viruses, these type of things. And this is really where the future of probiotics is. It is about developing and culturing and creating super strains of probiotic, very much like the Navy SEALs goes through a training, and these individuals have extraordinary powers to deal with chaos. And in today's world where we want to improve our immunity and our function and our gut health, P through M is head and shoulders above any probiotic out there.
So my understanding is it can be used daily as a supplement, but it can also be used in larger quantities as a defense measure.
We've tested this literally with over 100 of our friends who have been suffering from various times of food poisoning. And a handful of those guys, when you're in food poisoning, and within 20 to 30 minutes, you complete recovery.
That's awesome. And I've seen it happen myself. Angie has felt bad a number of times, and several of people in the house or family have. And I say, take 10. If that doesn't feel good in an hour, take 20. And you've told me you can't overdose on them, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's the beauty of P through M. You can't take too much. They'll fight off the bad guys, and they'll get your digestion rocking and rolling the way it should.
So if you want to have a healthy gut and you want some defense, carry P3OM with you wherever you go, airplanes, cars, business meetings, hotels, conferences, and you've got your Navy SEALs in the bottle, and they're ready for you anytime.
Spirit Gym with Paul Chek listeners now get 15% off their purchase of Probiotic Breakthrough by going to bioptimizers.com/Spirit Gym and use the code PAUL15 at checkout. You can choose from 3 different sizes, and in addition, Bioptimizers always have special bonus gifts and additional savings when you get multiple bottles. So head to bioptimizers.com/Spirit Gym and check out Probiotic Breakthrough with the code PAUL15 for 15% off.
Next, we can look at some common archetypes that we are probably all familiar with, and we can see a basic example of what they do. So the archetypes of the creator, the ruler, and the caregiver. So creator, innovation, ruler, control, caregiver, service, provide structure in our lives and in a society or a culture. These archetypes, the lover, the jester, and the everyman, which means belonging, are what we use to pursue connection. The innocent, the sage, and the explorer are what we use as examples to explore spirituality. And then leave legacy represents the outlaw, which is liberation, the magician, the use of power, and the hero represents mastery. So these are the things that you have to leave behind a legacy or something of meaning and value in your life as examples. So here's just another example of the fact that we're all using archetypes constantly. The archetypes become essential character roles that God embodies as the gods of myth and ultimately through each human being. So this tells you then how we are embodying, participating in, and acting out myth or story through our lives. This is the nature of the divine drama being played out in and as Spirit Gym, which is existence itself. In Hinduism, they have the concept of Maya, which means the illusion or the grand illusion. Now, many people use that concept that all life is an illusion to drop out, but Arthur M. Young, in his excellent teachings, reminds us that Maya doesn't mean illusion, it means the illusion. Remember, God as zero has to create an illusion of something physical, tangible, and real, and that is life itself, the universe itself, and everything that we consider to be physical or objective or tangible, which is God playing out its own dream potentials in the story of life, which includes all living beings of all types in any time, place, space, or dimension. Now, archetypes are neutral and they act through us as desires. Archetypes act through our instinctual drives. That's how they get a hold of us. Each individual expresses a given archetype in ways that are unique and can range from balance to extreme polarization. For example, you see the emperor or the king in the middle, and you see the polarity symbol. So a king can be a loving, honest king, or a weakling, which means he won't last long, to the tyrant king, or the tyrant emperor, which we're all very familiar with because there's been many of them throughout history, and there's unfortunately several of them right now. Now, the thing that we learn from archetypes is we each fulfill our role in our own ways, for better or worse. Polarity ensures conscious growth in spirit gem. So no matter what you look at, which archetype you look at, the king, the warrior, or any archetype, the lover, there is, if you look at them from a male perspective, there's a mature, seasoned, intelligent, well-rounded masculine expression, or there's an immature, masculine, unconscious expression. If you use women, then you have the same thing. A mother can be a absolutely loving, amazing, well-balanced mother. She can be disastrously uninterested in her child and indifferent, and she can be an over-loving mother. Either polarity is fine because it's all experience for God. God cannot limit itself because God can't know itself by only expressing the positive, because you cannot have consciousness without the juxtaposition of that which is positive and that which is negative, or inside and outside, or right and wrong, or he and she, or good and bad, or light and dark. Those are the things that we are conscious of. So the archetypes are the characters in the story, and God is what is playing out and dreaming all stories into existence for its own experience and its own self-realization, which means that we are all actually filling a role in the divine drama as Ram Dass, God workers, which means we're each unique individuals in the divine drama having an experience, all of which is how God becomes aware of itself. Now, to help you understand how we story our lives, you see the objective psyche symbol at the top. It's always active in the collective and personal unconscious. Again, archetypes are how meaning is created within the psyche. We're only conscious of the archetypal mythic beings that are active within our conscious awareness. Studying archetypes and myths enhances consciousness, ultimately offering us greater free will. And this is why I've spent many years studying myths, studying archetypes, studying story, etc., because as a therapist, I have to understand how it is that people get themselves in so much trouble, and how it is that I will be able to support them in getting out, which is why one of the most important things I do with people is help them develop their own myth so they can consciously be aware of the story, not only that they've been acting out, but they can choose to act out, which is absolutely critical for 2026 for all the reasons that I will be bringing up and some of the things I shared in the introduction. The archetype within our psyche produces an archetypal image. All mothers create an image of a mother. All fathers create an image of a father. All warriors create an image of a warrior, without which we could not be aware of what we were conscious of. This is why we're different than AI or computers, because we not only have images, but we have feeling and values associated to any image, which is sentience. And that is channeled through the ego self. So the ego is really the nexus of all the programs that we were given as children. And when the ego reaches a point of self-awareness, that's when the ego is formed. That's when we have a fully defined sense of self, right, wrong, should, shouldn't, do, don't, the things that make us truly an individual. So the ego is actually paradoxically made predominantly of other people's ideas, and that's why spiritual evolution is so important. That's why the chariot archetype, where you have to become conscious of what you're creating and manage the forces of consciousness, is so important, because without it you just stay unconscious with an ego, which means you're just acting out somebody else's drama. Here you see at the unconscious level, the objective psyche acts through us via our instincts. So the mother has the instinct to get pregnant and mother, and that unconscious archetypal system acts right through the DNA and the physiological systems of the body, and that's where we get our urges. Our archetypal activation comes by the urge to be a warrior, the urge to conquer, the urge to be a successful entrepreneur, would be the entrepreneur archetype. So there's something inside of us. Our heart tells us, our gut tells us. Without our instincts, we would not be able to feel or perceive archetypes, and those that don't listen to the impulses of archetypes often end up with illnesses. For example, you are a lawyer who became a lawyer because of pressure by your parents, but you never really wanted to be a lawyer, you wanted to be a musician. No matter how so-called successful you are as a lawyer, to the degree that your soul is not doing what it came to do in the divine play and fulfill its soul contracts with other souls to help each other grow and evolve, then you'll become an unhealthy lawyer, because your instincts will continue to A, try to get your attention, and B, if you don't listen, then, as Jung says, the gods will inhabit your solar plexus or your body instead of you acting them out. So think of each of the archetypes in the tarot as a little god, that which has the power to transform and to create. To the degree we do not listen to our archetypal drives and follow our heart, then we don't listen to our instincts. And when we don't listen to our instincts, which are our survival drives, then we begin to have problems surviving. In other words, health problems and psychological problems. Now, just to help you understand a little bit better how the unconscious and the conscious work together, on the left-hand side of your screen, here you see the implicate order, the enfolded, the immeasurable realm of spirit. Here's the unconscious aspects of ourself. So in each little body, the black represents the aspects of them that are unconscious. For example, you're unconscious of how you're digesting, metabolizing, assimilating, and eliminating food. You're unconscious of what's making your heart beat and making you breathe. There's a myriad of things you're unconscious of. There's about 30 billion biochemical reactions a second in the body, and something's controlling them. That's the unconscious or the subconscious. The subconscious represents the unconscious aspects of our cells and our body and our systems. The unconscious is everything that's happening to create and maintain reality that we're unconscious of. The implicate order and the unconscious is acting through the archetypes, which we've just discussed. And so here we see examples of archetypes. We all have a mother. We were all children. We all have a father. And there are teachers. Now I could put any number of archetypes in here. But these are in the explicate order, because, you know, this could be my mother, my father, and me, or me, my wife, and my child, and a teacher of mine. Here represents our conscious awareness, or our ego, or our sense of self. We're usually conscious of our own thoughts, for example. And so this is how the unconscious is working through the archetypes and creating our drives. Oftentimes we have the urge to do things. We don't know where they came from or why, which can be an archetypal drive. Now, if you look over here, this circle right here is that circle there, but we've taken out the infrastructure. And so this is non-local, which means it's not based in causality or a past, present, and future restriction. It means it's everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Archetypes are not physical things. Archetypes are quite mysterious. There is attempts to explain them in quantum physics and other areas, but we don't need to go into that because we should all be aware of the fact that archetypes are real. We all have a mother, we all have a father, we all have teachers, etc. So the objective psyche, or the collective unconscious, is what's pouring into all of us unconsciously. But at the conscious level, you might have the urge to call a friend and say, hey, I was just thinking about you. At the conscious level, you made a phone call in the causal dimension. You initiated an action in space-time. They answer the phone and say, how amazing, I was thinking about you too. So the fact that they were both thinking about each other lets us know that at the unconscious level, we are communicating through psi, or the non-local dimension. Now, this is going on constantly. There's no sense even debating that. Anyone that debates that just needs to spend more time studying with a teacher that's awake. So why this is important for 2026 is because we are all at some level limited to our level of consciousness, but relatively unconscious. And as the world goes through transitions, there's different archetypes that are emerging or that are needing our attention. For example, we've been suffering from patriarchy for a very long time, and if we don't have a reemergence of the feminine, we're probably going to destroy ourselves fairly quickly. Consider what I said earlier, that 80% of all the people involved in the creation of AI are men. Well, meditate on that alone when you consider the power of AI to create and destroy. We're basically creating an Ahrimanic, mechanical, electrical, invisible God with tremendous power. So if we're not conscious of archetypes and how they're acting on us, and we don't have enough awareness to connect to the archetypes of life, nature, the archetype of light, warmth, love, we will probably destroy ourselves quite soon, because we are now wielding a level of technology and power that's about 15 magnitudes of order ahead of our moral conscious capacity to be responsible for the destructive powers we're unleashing on the world and each other. So this is me teaching you how to understand how to become more conscious and how to access the greater whole of ourself, for example, the world or humanity, and open ourselves to the inner guidance within which our heart becomes the necessary compass, not our head. As Marshall Rosenberg, the founder of nonviolent communication, says, the head is a very dangerous place to live, and he is dead right.
Hi everyone, this is Penny, interrupting Paul's podcast with an important announcement. If you've been listening to Paul's podcast regularly, you'll already know how much your gut affects everything, from your mood to your energy to your overall vitality. So here's something I'm genuinely excited to share. The Chek Institute is offering the Gut Health Reset, a free online mini course designed to help you finally get your digestion and your life back on track. Yep, it's completely free and there's no catch. This course gives you the tools to understand what your gut's been trying to tell you. You'll learn how to identify the root causes of bloating, fatigue, and brain fog, and how to start supporting your microbiome naturally. It's packed with Paul's tried and true wisdom and the Chek Institute's holistic approach, the same philosophy that's transformed thousands of lives. Think of it as a short, powerful reset to reconnect you with your body before the new year hits. So if you're ready to finish this year strong and start 2026 feeling clear, energized, and balanced, grab your free access now. Just head to paul.chekinstitute.com/spirit gym. Again, that's paul.chekinstitute.com/spirit gym and start your gut health reset today. Your gut, and honestly, your whole body, will thank you.
Now, with that stated, we can get into the numerology of 2026, and really, numerology is a system of archetypes. Numbers are all archetypes. Anytime you think of the number 1, no matter what you're talking about, 1 ounce, 1 dog, 1 lover, 1 world, you're using the archetype of 1. Pythagoras is the father of modern numerology. Math is the objective, rational science of numbers. Numerology is the subjective, feeling, experiential science of numbers. Numerology uses reduction to the numbers 1 through 9 to get to the core number field from which each larger number emerges. Now, a field is a place of action. So we have, for example, field theory in quantum physics, which suggests that it is fields that govern the flow of energy and information, which is what is behind the created world or the created universe. That's one theory. It's a very good one, by the way. But we go to a playing field, like a football field. So a field is a place of action. So these archetypes represent a field or number field of action in which things happen, in which consciousness moves and takes hold of you and produces tangible action in life. Now, to show you how to do a numerological reduction, I put my own birth date here, August 24th, 1961. If you had 8 plus 2 plus 4 plus 1 plus 9 plus 6 plus 1, you get 31. If you reduce 31, 3 plus 1 equals 4. You take any number, no matter how big it is, and you keep reducing it. So if this is 131, we go 1 and 3 is 4 and 1 is 5. It would reduce to 5. That gets you to the number field. So all numbers emerge from the number fields that include 0 and 1 through 9 in numerology. And so I could go on and on about this, but if you're interested, you just buy a good book on numerology. Now, if you want to see the basics, I've got the meanings, the key words that signify what the qualities of each of these 9 numbers plus 0 are. So on the left of your screen, you see 0 represents the void, infinite possibility, eternity, cycles, or the circle of life. 1 means independence, will, beginnings, pioneering, individuality. Now these are just the summary of. These things are much more vast, but this is like if you put salt in water and boil it down, you'll end up with nothing but salt. So this is like the essence. 2 is balance, partnership, diplomacy, contrast, polarity, or duality. 3 is creativity, so there's where our Holy Trinity comes in. Joy, communication, self-expression, groups, and fun. 4 represents foundation, pragmatism, material reality, problem solving. Material reality is made of earth, water, fire, and air. 4 elements. 5 represents adventure, challenge, innovation, risk, freedom, and challenge, and conflict. 6 is harmony, community, domesticity, love, healing, and service. 7 is spirituality, intellect, personal growth, solitude, and metaphysics. 8 is authority, manifestation, business, leadership, abundance, and goals. 9 represents wisdom, closure, completion, service to humanity. We just came out, or we're just coming now out of a 9-year. 2, 0, 2, 5 equals 9. So my podcast I did at this time last year went through the significance of 9, which was the hermit in tarot, So the hermit's job is to isolate itself for purification and mastery in order to be ready to create in the divine mirror without being self-destructive or destructive to life. So you'll see that we have to look carefully at how well we did last year or in 2025 to prepare us for what's coming. So now if we take 2026 from a numerological perspective, when we break the numbers down, we see 2. The first 2, balance, partnership, diplomacy, contrast, and polarity. That means as long as there's a 2 in front of the year, that will be the theme. 2, 0. The 0 represents the void of infinite possibility, eternity, cycles, and the circle of life, which we're, well in. We can't have life without the circle of life. Whenever you have a second number, then you have a doubling of the number field, which is even more profound if they're right next to each other. But we have 2 2s in 2026, so that means that the issues of balance, partnership, diplomacy, contrast, and polarity are of double importance in this year, or in any such year where you get a doubling of numbers. Remember, 2 represents duality, which is what it requires to have consciousness. So what is consciousness? There's many definitions I could give, but my favorite one comes from a famous psychiatrist and Jungian analyst who wrote many excellent books, one of them called The Creation of Consciousness by Edward F. Edinger. And he defines consciousness as follows. Consciousness is a psychic substance which is produced by the experience of opposites, suffered not blindly, but in living awareness of opposites. So our second 2 symbolizes that consciousness is a psychic substance. That means it's real, it's tangible, and it's produced by the experience of opposites, suffered not blindly. So wherever we're doing things unconsciously that are antagonistic to life and destructive, will bring the pain teacher to wake us up. And we're at a tipping point now where we can't afford to continue to destroy the infrastructure of life or nature, or we're going to perish. So we must not be blind. We must wake up, which is what the journey through the tarot is all about. And we must be conscious and live in awareness of opposites in 2026. 6 in the number 2026 represents harmony, community, domesticity, love, healing, and service, which tells you that this year we need to use our awareness of consciousness of the things that we need to do to create harmony, community, make things more healthy from a domestic perspective, create more love and less division and polarity. We must heal and support each other in service, the total of which is 10. 10 is the end of one cycle and the beginning of a new cycle. New beginnings that establish the basis of experience in the new cycle. So we're beginning a brand new cycle of the 9 cycle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 10 begins the new cycle. So take that circle at the top, the void, the circle of life, divide it by 9, and then if you break the circle and continue it, it becomes a spiral. So the next level up, we've just finished a cycle of 9. We're coming into a new cycle. Now, notice that 2026 begins a new cycle that ends in 2035. Some of you may see there's some significance to that number. 2035 is the year that the World Economic Forum, the globalists, and all the control oligarchs state that they will have not only reduced the population radically, but will have complete control, during which we will own nothing and be happy. And that's where all the digital ID is coming from. That's where the controlling and changing of the money systems coming from. That's what COVID was about. That's what AI is about, by the way, I believe myself. It is a system to give you the illusion of support and to make your life easy, but it is actually studying your every move and being ultimately used to capture you and in many ways dumb you down and numb your creative ability so you can't outsmart the system. So just know that if we don't get it right now in 2026 and start making significant moves towards sovereignty and restoring our freedoms and protecting our freedoms, then we're beginning a dangerous cycle. And that's why I'm taking the time to explain all these things to everybody so that you can have a much deeper perspective of what's actually happening in the divine drama. And remember, God says yes to all of it because it's all how God becomes aware of its potentials and aware of itself, and it's how God self-reflects. Remember, God by definition is zero or unconditional love. That which is unconditional cannot know itself. That's why it can't think, can't make meaning. It can only dream. But through dreaming, mind is created, archetypes are created, and meaning is made. And God's as willing to explore the negative potentials of itself as it is the positive, which is why Isaiah 45:7 in the King James Bible basically says, I create the light and the dark, good and evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Now, depending on which version you read, it's slightly different, but that's basically what it says. It means God's doing it all, and we're it. There is no way to separate yourself from God unless you just don't understand what the word means. Okay, so with that said, let's look at the cycle concept from a couple of different concepts. Most of you would be familiar with Om as the sound, Om, which in Hinduism is essentially the sound of God singing itself into existence. God not only dreams itself into existence, God sings it. So it's the sound of creation emerging and creation being. Om represents the master cycle within which all cycles are nested. So even a universe has an Om cycle. The letters of Om represent in yoga I awaken, which means spring or the beginning of a cycle. We're right here. So right now in 2025, if you're listening to this in 2025, we're coming to the end of a cycle where we need a period of rest and introspection and healing. If we don't give that to ourselves, we're more likely to burn out and just make the same mistakes. But spring, represents the beginning of a cycle or the beginning of a new hero's journey. U here represents summer, which means I'm dreaming. I awaken. I'm dreaming. Summer. Means fall. I'm falling asleep. That's the fall of your life. So childhood, adulthood, old age, death. And so is this aspect of the cycle, and it leads to an underscore, which is a necessary period of rest or the period at which one cycle ends and another begins. So Om means the stages of a cycle. So whichever way you want to look at it, if this is the last 9 years, we're here now, we're coming right here into a new cycle, which I said ends at 2035. So we need to be conscious, because in the next cycle, if we continue doing what we've been doing to each other and to nature, we might be, without a home, without bodies. We might be wandering around the universe as souls going, we fucked that up. What do we do now? We got to go find another planet. Hopefully there'll be a diva out there that'll guide us to home, but I prefer we stay here and get it right. Why not? We've got a beautiful, beautiful planet. Stunningly beautiful planet. My God, if you can't see that, then you've been smoking the wrong drugs or playing too many video games or something. The point here is 10 is the beginning of a new cycle. We're coming into a very, very important time, because if you begin a new cycle with the same unconscious behaviors and disabling beliefs and unhealed trauma that you carried into the last cycle, you're going to repeat the same behaviors. And as you will see when we get to the tarot interpretation, that can be a bitch. So as we enter into the new cycle, we need to be aware of the 3 qualities of the soul as taught by Plotinus, which I've investigated inside myself thoroughly and found this to be an absolutely undeniable expression of the nature of the soul. So at the top you see God, the one that gives souls, abiding. That's the pivot of the Tao. That's not yin, not yang. It's the pivot, like the pivot between a hanging scale. So that's the pivot. It's not female and it's not male. It's not phenomenon. It's what's witnessing. That's what the witness in you is. And the soul, as you can see, negative I means I, like I am talking to you, I yourself, your sense of self. The soul has the capacity to reflect, which requires memory. We couldn't make any sense of meaning without memory. We wouldn't remember what mommy or daddy or up or down or anything meant. And then we all have the capacity with our free will to represent ourselves. That's the positive I, a new way of expressing ourselves that's dream and life affirmative. So what we need to do is reflect on the past 9-year cycle, especially, and say, where did we get it right? Where did we get it wrong? We need to reflect, because we're right here, right now, about to enter a new cycle. So if we don't rest, reflect, get clear, and redream, we will recapitulate the bad habits, not only of the last 9 years, but of the entire history of humanity. And all you got to do is read the Bible to see just how unconscious, out of control, susceptible to control, illusion, delusion, coercion, manipulation, greed, you name it, it's in there. If the Bible's one thing, it's a great record of what human beings have a tendency to do to each other and what they allow to happen to each other by not being conscious. And it's also a great example of what happens when you believe in a God created by emperors. Use your heart to feel what you know. So now let's take a look at 2026, which again equals 10. First of all, the word tarot means the royal road. And that means the royal road to awakening or enlightenment. To be awake. It's an ancient system of archetypal correspondences. It includes alchemy, elements and transformation, astrology, which is logos, the divine plan, Kabbalah, numerology, color, archetypes, frequency, and therapy. So color, archetypes, frequency, and color therapy science is included. We're all familiar with the chakra system, which correlates with the colors of the rainbow. That's included. Symbology, deep in symbology, as you're about to find out if you're a new beginner to tarot. The hero's or the fool's journey. The archetype of the hero's journey is built right into the tarot, as I shared earlier. It also includes depth and archetypal psychology, the objective collective psyche expressed both collectively and individually, and more. In tarot, the Fool, 0 represents God, 0 dreaming itself into being to engage the hero's journey depicted in the 21 major arcana archetypes, as I briefly outlined. The Fool is both on a journey of discovery, self-realization, and a journey of remembering who it is that is really doing the dreaming. Aho, we're all the Fool. We're all remembering who is doing the dreaming, which is critically important at this time in humanity's evolution. The fool is the embodiment of God's desire and will for love. God, as unconditional love, can experience love as the experience because that is a condition. The fool, each of us, represents the self, the spirit soul, which is initially unconscious of the fact that it is God, and only God can give or create a soul. Just as any orphan child has a deep yearning to find and know its parents, the fool seeks to consciously know its source, which inspires the journey from unconscious dreaming to conscious self-realization. In other words, we're all at a very deep level trying to answer the question, which is the basis of yoga, who am I? Additionally, each of us as the fool is born to parents with a God image, a perceived highest power, which is the Imago Dei archetype. Remember, according to Jung, that is the most important archetype because that's the archetype from which all other archetypes emerge. Remember, the fool is the archetype 0. To get to 1 and any number, you have to come from 0. The fool is indoctrinated into a God image by its family of origin beginning in the womb. Even an atheist has its own God image. Whatever you believe the highest power is, that's your God image. Even with the atheist's rejection of God, there is still an image to reject, and always something fills that void, something to worship or possess our belief system, which may be the non-God. It is then one belief pitted against another, and that's how you get the dynamic elements of a plot or a story. There's always a good guy and a bad guy. We'll get into that. As I mentioned earlier, Jung warned that it is impossible to tell if the Imago Dei creates us or we create it. That's worth meditating on. It is impossible to tell whether the God image or the archetype of the Imago Dei, the God image, creates us or we create it. There's a mystery there. Whatever you believe becomes your reality. Jung also stated that the Imago Dei is the image that images and is inherent in the psyche of man. So what that means is our capacity to image is the Imago Dei, and without it we would not have the capacity for images, which means we would not essentially be aware of what we were thinking or why we were having the feelings we were having, because thoughts in human beings produce images. The fool represents the imaginal capacity within the psyche. Now, the imaginal is the capacity for perception and should not be confused with imagination. That's a huge distinction there. So the imaginal faculty is the capacity for perception, without which you would not know what you are hearing as I'm talking to you or what you are looking at on the screen. Jung postulated that God has two sides, a satanic or dark force and a numinous or divine side, and that we cannot understand the divine without the demonic and vice versa. These are complementary opposites of the single archetype of the self, or Imago Dei, that is the image of God. Each of us is a self, or as a self is the fool on the journey of self-discovery. So here you see a cartoon image from Star Wars, and we have the play of good and evil, good guys and bad guys. So there you see a metaphor for each of us kind of in the battle of awakening, the challenges of awakening and the challenges of relationships and the challenges of love and everything that the tarot is all about. Jung discovered that the self, the fool, always carries maximum polarity to ensure growth, conscious evolution, and individuation. This means that regardless of how enlightened the fool becomes, the self will always create or attract challenges that ensure growth. You can simply state through observation that our challenges can be defined in the evolution of I awareness or I-centric behavior, that of the child, to we, the adolescent and the adult, to all, the wisdom of a wise man or a wise woman that realizes it's the whole of the world that supports us, and that is another definition of the self, everything that supports you, with self with a capital S. So the self represents everything that supports your ability to live, which we need to be very, very conscious of as we move into the new year for reasons that should be obvious. Speaking of the imago Dei, or God image, Jung says when the Christ event is viewed as a dream of the deeper dreaming self and interpreted symbolically like a dream, it reflects the incredible polarization and deep inner split existing in the collective unconscious of humanity. This tension of opposites symbolically plays itself out on the world stage in the adversarial figures of Christ and Satan, and in other similar polarities in different cultures and religions. I explored the tension of opposites in episode 250, Lucifer, Christ, Ahriman, which is an older conception of the same duality from Zoroastrianism, which predates Christianity by over 500 years and has definitely influenced Christianity and Gnosticism. In all religions, really, with very few exceptions, if any. Christ's utterly sublime and spotless nature evoked a blacker darkness on the seemingly contrary opposite to it, as if the two interconnected opposites reciprocally yet mutually co-arose together. Seen symbolically, Satan, to quote Jung, represents the counterpole of that tremendous tension in the world psyche, which Christ's advent signified, and was related to Christ as inseparably as the shadow belongs to light. At some point in his writings, Jung said, when the church created Christ, he cast a light so bright they had to create Satan to counterbalance him. You might want to meditate on that, especially those of you that are indoctrinated. This is existent in all religions because it's inherent to the basis of story, which is what myth fundamentally is. When you get to a story that has meanings about the mysteries of life, the experience of life, the cycles of life, the process of life and death and birth and age and everything that relates to life, that's what myths are. They're trying to explain the unexplainable. I share these deep conceptions and realizations to help us all understand what is within us that inspires our individual and collective hero's journey. As we progress in the podcast, I will share relevant aspects of the Fool's journey through the tarot archetypes as it relates to our personal and collective challenges and opportunities in the new year. But again, I want to remind you, as my little man with the rotating Tai Chi symbol shows, the self always carries maximum polarity. When we're young, we do a lot of silly things because we're not very conscious. When we're teenagers, we do more silly things that are more dangerous because we're still not conscious, but we think we are. So as you evolve from a child to an adult, or at least the age that you can have sex, you have to deal with the challenges of the polarity of relationship and the responsibility of the power of your sex organs, and on it goes. So no matter how enlightened you are, once you're an enlightened being like Buddha, Buddha had to deal with the challenges of humanity or human beings. Buddha had 2 attempts on his life, for example. Many mystics have been murdered, often by the dogmatic people of their own religion for telling their own truth about their experience of God. And so we can see how this plays out. Point being is, no matter how enlightened you are, the self will maintain the polarity to keep you growing, just like no matter how strong you get in the gym, you just add more weight to the bar or you stop getting stronger, and the psyche grows the same way. So now, without going through a long explanation, this shows you a commonly used structure to understand how tarot is laid out. So you have 21 major archetypes. The Fool exists outside the archetypes because that's God telling the story, but it's also you. So once you enter into life, you're in the 3 rows. And so the first row of 7 is spirit manifesting in form. That's called the stages of the formative forces, becoming human. The second row of 7, 8 through 14, represents man, ego, consciousness, and earthly reality, creating equilibrium, and the problems of morality. And this is the first stage of purification in order to essentially get to where you can choose to be in the world or in a body, or not in the world or in the body. In other words, to get off what Buddha called the wheel of samsara, or stay in if you're enjoying the game. Many do. I enjoy it, but I'm going to take a long rest after this lifetime. Then we go to the final row of 7, which is illumination, self-realization, and the final purification, without which you cannot pass through the gate of the manifest. And so that's basically the structure and where we're at in the evolution collectively as humanity is right here. Steiner says that the function of humanity is to become the 10th hierarchy of angels, which means we will all have to pass through this gate. So all of us as a species will have to evolve. Now that's going to take a long time, but for obvious reasons. But we can personally evolve through this gate and enter the dimension of spirit, or higher dimensions of reality. Ra talks about the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th dimension, etc. There's many models out there that talk about these things. Again, Tarot 10 represents the divine mirror, or self, i.e. your personal self, and self-reflection, which means our collective reflection, our reflection as a whole, and reflecting on everything that supports our ability to live and to be human. Now, as a side note, all the other 21 archetypes beyond number 9 can be reduced. If you take Tarot 11, that's 2 1s. 1 plus 1 is 2. So that means that the High Priestess is actually the seed from which 11 emerges as an extension of that archetype. If you take 19, the Sun, you reduce 1 plus 9 is 10, but 10 has 2 digits, so 1 plus 0 is 1. The Sun is actually the outcropping or outgrowth of the archetype of the magician. So the point is, the majority of and the most important aspects of what tarot is teaching us happen in the first 10 cards, and we are here culminating in 2026 at the Wheel of Fortune. So if this is 2026, 2025, 2024, 2023, 2022, 2021, 2020, 2019 was when COVID, the pandemic, started, and it was governed by the control oligarchs, emperors. And it emerged from the archetype of the Empress, but because of a lack of feminine energy in the world and a lack of female guidance, then we got lost. And so you can go back through the years to see what the archetypal theme of each year, and it just keeps repeating itself in these 9-year cycles, and 10 is the beginning, of course, as I said, of a new cycle. So here the Fool comes into the matrix, is spirited, has a soul, is born to a mother and a father. The child becomes a teenager, leaves home and goes out to seek its own ideology and own identity, but is often trapped in the programming of mom and dad's ideology or mom and dad's Imago Dei imprint, which either helps it because it gets wise guidance or it gets misled. Notice this guy's wearing garments with a lot of black, and this one white and blue. Blue represents the mind and creativity. Black here represents the dark side. So here you have Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader type concept. And there you see these keys are the keys to the higher dimensions. But there's 2 of them, duality. So once we leave home as a teenager and we go out into the world, we have to deal with our programming, and we've also got to figure out who our people are, that's the beginning of the warrior archetype. So the child becomes the warrior. Then our sex organs and our hormones draw us into intimate relationships, and we realize that sex and intimacy isn't just fun. It comes with a lot of challenges. Don't we know that? And that leads us to the experience, for example, many of you that got married were happy and lovey-dovey, and a year and a half or two later were having hard time. The average marriage today only lasts 2.5 years, and the average person is married 3 times in a lifetime, so much for till death do we part. But we realize that love and relationship brings a lot out of us that we didn't even know was there. We can one minute be making love, and the next minute be in a terrible fight and even being abusive to each other, which leads us as the fool to coming to the awareness that we must begin to learn to manage the forces of consciousness, the darkness and the light, the feminine and the masculine, polarity. And this armor is not armor against other people. It is armor against our own unconscious habits, tendencies, beliefs, behaviors, wounds, complexes, mommy complex, daddy complex, hero complex, whatever, all of that stuff in the psyche, the broken parts, the confused parts, the programmed parts. So this is really the beginning of waking up to our responsibility to ourself as an individual. And this is where the quest to understand who am I really begins, because we want to know what is it that's working through me and causing me to say and do things I normally wouldn't do, and later go, why did I do that or say that? That maturation process leads to the awareness that the ego is a very bad tour guide, and that there is something inside of us, sometimes called the conscience within us, the moral impulse, but that represents the soul in us. So the lady represents the soul, which is God within, and this is what legitimate spiritual practice seeks to develop. So here we are now probably, hopefully, an adult, and we come to the realization that we've got to do some honest inner work and get past this thing called an ego, where it's probably going to kill us at this stage. And we start looking for the God within, not a God that you read out of somebody else's books, the God within you. In order to deepen this relationship and get past dogma and programming, we must go into isolation to grow our consciousness. The wand represents wisdom and the use of power in ways that are life affirmative and love affirmative. And whenever you see mountains in tarot, that represents the journey to enlightenment. So here he's achieving mastery. He's up high. He's made a journey up high into isolation. White means purification. Gray means the marriage of the male and the female for strength and power. The beard represents the growth of wisdom. And so this is what was supposed to be going on in 2025 within us individually and collectively. For a lot, it has happened. But now we come to the point where the hermit must come into the world and look honestly through the eyes of somebody that's awake at him or herself. And regardless of whether you've made it past being mommy and daddy's little child, or being indoctrinated into a religion or an ideology or an ism, regardless if you've learned to manage love and your own mind and found God within you or soul within you, or done the work to heal, purify, and take responsibility for yourself, you still face the mirror. So no matter who we are, what level of development we're at, 2026 means in some way we all have to face the mirror and realize the power of our own mind. Now, the magician is the creator of the matrix. It's the myth of Lucifer. God says to God's highest angel, I need a way of self-reflecting so I can experience love, life, and myself. And so Lucifer, God's highest angel, uses his deep wisdom and intelligence and power to create a matrix of self-reflection, and says to God, once you enter into the matrix, you cannot get out until you master these 4 challenges. 1 is the use of power, the wand. 2 is the use of mind to create harmony, beauty, good, and truth. 3, the cup represents love and the mastery of love and using love in ways that are good for everybody involved. And finally, earth, so fire, air, water, earth, the coin, means the mastery of our bodies, our environment, and the use of money in ways that are good for everybody involved. So those are the 4 traps in the matrix that we've got to work through, that ultimately we need the soul's guidance to get through, and that we need to spend time getting clear on what is and isn't life affirmative, what isn't a need versus a want, what's important versus unimportant, and answer the question, what would love do now, before we face the mirror? Because if we don't know what would love do now, then we will do whatever we were programmed to do by mommy and daddy. So this card is the archetype that represents the point in your evolution that determines if you will progress in your individuation, which means to grow your awareness of what is in the unconscious, your shadow, and to evolve into a contributing adult in the world, your path of progressive enlightenment, or revert to one or more of the previous 9 archetypes in which you are still unconscious. And we can revert backwards through bad choices and unconscious actions. Though you're always using the entire 22 archetypes, until you're conscious of how you're using them, you're being used by them. You remain susceptible to the influences of the personal and collective unconscious, which carries the light and dark of you, your personal unconscious and shadow, and humanity, which is why we should be very concerned about the fact that AI is being trained on human beings, and it does not have a heart to discern what is moral from what is immoral, what is life affirmative from what isn't, what is true from what is not true, what is good from ugly, beautiful and not beautiful, etc. So the Wheel of Fortune again represents the divine mirror. What hasn't been healed, purified, and made conscious through the process exemplified by the Chariot, Strength, the Hermit, represents the degree to which one is fated versus consciously choosing their own myth and therefore taking the reins of their own destiny. So if you're unconscious, you're fated, which means you're going to act out your family history, you're going to act out society's bad habits, you're going to act out isms and belief systems, and you're not going to question authority. You're just going to be a child that thinks you're an adult. Now, looking at 10 as a number field, where I'm mixing the numerological aspects of tarot with tarot. Number 1 gives strength, power, and a winning mentality, initiative, and optimism. A negative expression of 1 is excessive individuality, egoism, narcissism, and an inability to effectively engage in we and all relationships and responsibilities. So consider the impact of social media, gaming, and AI on regular users. There's now research emerging showing what happens to people that use AI regularly. But we need to be conscious of the fact that these technologies look simple and easy to use and friendly, but they're dangerous if you don't have a high enough level of consciousness. In fact, if you remember the documentary The Social Dilemma that interviewed many of the inventors of social media, every one of them said they do not let their children use it. So we got a 1 and a 0 and 10. 0 is an amplifier. So whatever is contained within you as 1, self, is amplified by the addition of 0 for better or worse. So 0 acts as an amplifier. 0 also numerologically is associated with intuition, and it's a very, very good time to do the healing work and the purification necessary to have the ability to trust your intuition and your instincts or your gut feelings as we move into this new cycle. Your capacity to purify, heal, and embody Tarot 0 to 9, as reflected in Tarot 10, determines if you advance in your progressive enlightenment process or are veiled and unable to express yourself authentically in Tarot 11 through 20, the culmination of which is 21, the world, as I explained previously. The Wheel of Fortune represents the mirror into which we redream. Very important. We are about to go into a cycle of redreaming. It's wise to carefully consider what our I, we, and all dream is to be, or the past inserts itself into the present and becomes birthed in the next cycle of creation, represented by 1 through 9. So just ask yourself this question. At the rate that computers are advancing technologically, and the rate AI is advancing, and the rate we're creating problems for ourselves, how much of that can we afford to unconsciously birth into the next cycle? Like the Om cycle, 10 represents the repetition of cosmic, earthly, and bodily and mental emotional cycles. In our life, we go through 9-year cycles according to the cosmic solar logos blueprint. It is not identical events that repeat. It is attitudes and mental emotional patterns, beliefs, and behaviors that repeat themselves. In other words, you can go back to the same restaurant over and over again, but whether or not you're arguing or fighting with your girlfriend or your spouse like you were last year depends on whether you've grown up and matured. So the logos is actually the blueprint within which we become conscious of who and what we really are, so we can become co-creators with God. And that's what the magician's 4 symbols, the wand, power, the sword, mind, the cup, love, and the coin, money or embodiment, represent. They're the patterns that we repeat. Those themes are repeating themselves throughout the evolutionary process. You could say that Earth is a school, and that's what we're here to study, those 4 key modes of self-expression and relationship. What repeats and remanifests in 10 is your ideas about yourself and your understanding of the world and your place in it. So if that doesn't grow, you've got to be careful, because if that's not growing, neither is your awareness of how you're using advanced technology. Lack of awareness and commitment to spiritual growth in number fields 1 through 9 results in a recycling of all that remains unconscious, undone, or incomplete. We carry whatever is whole or incomplete into 10, the Wheel of Fortune, or a new cycle as represented by number 10. Again, cycles are expressions of the logos or divine plan. They are the lattice for growth in love and conscious evolution. Cycles are like a mirror that does not change. What can change with our hearts leading our heads is what we see and perceive in the divine mirror of self. So as you can see by my pictures there, the top one where the slim woman looks in the mirror and sees a fat woman represents the fact that our perception in a large way equals our reality, and that's largely based on our programming and our unhealed wounds and our ancestral influences and our unconscious programming. Now, we can also be like the kitten that sees itself as a lion in the mirror and have a very positive outlook on ourselves and be inspired and motivated to grow into what we're capable of. The highest self of the human being is what's dreaming us into our full potential, acting like a magnetic force, drawing us through the matrix that is represented by the tarot, inspiring us to learn, to grow, and evolve. Now, the flip side of that is narcissism is a person who looks in the mirror and sees somebody a lot more powerful or more beautiful or more intelligent than they really are. And that delusion coming into the new year just magnifies itself, and you end up having to confront the reality of yourself. We all will in 2026 in some way or another. Now, 10 in balance is someone who is generally loved by all who love. In other words, they're somebody that we can all appreciate, like an Eckhart Tolle or a Thich Nhat Hanh. Anybody that we think of as somebody that's generally wise and undeniably respectable and lovable. A 10 in balance is a spontaneous person. They're optimistic, open, and joyful. They're protected by the cosmos because they're operating from their heart. They're intuitive, and what appears to be an amazingly lucky person is the product of a conscious relationship with one's conscious and unconscious self. So if we have done the work of 1 through 9 and we enter 2026 as a 10 in balance, then we will experience success with minimum effort. We will follow the soul's guidance, and the synchronicities of life will be supportive. The magical events that seem to happen magically, such as meeting the right people, being in the right places at the right time, that make our life amazing, awesome, and allow things such as our creativity, our business ventures, our relationships to unfold in ways that create more love, more joy, and more beauty. Now, 10 unbalanced is susceptible to being ungrounded, impatient, manic, depressive, and confused. A 10 unbalanced is disorganized and challenged to create and experience success, often leading to high stress and high blood pressure. Likely to be loved by those that mirror your imbalances, drug addicts like drug addicts, criminals like criminals, and a source of stress, irritation to those that represent balance at the 10 stage of their development. A 10 out of balance can be critical and overly perfectionistic, which is often a means of projecting their own dissatisfaction with themselves outwardly. They can be very digital, binary, either on or off, 1 or 0. Everything is full on or nothing at all. A bipolar type personality trait. Not an easy person to be in relationship with, not even for themselves. Divine mirror, this archetype mirrors your authentic truth back to you, your own authenticity with yourself and others, and determines if this archetype is informing of your free will or your fate. In other words, if you did the work depicted in Tarot 1 through 9 to get ready for a 10-year, then the world will mirror your free will back to you. If not, you will be fated. This is one of the reasons Jung said, if you don't meet your unconscious on the inside through honest healing and spiritual growth and development work, it will meet you on the outside in the events of your life, and you will call it fate. So the Wheel of Fortune represents our ability to see ourselves in relationship to self, other, and world. If we do not look honestly at ourselves individually and collectively in 2026, we will face some very challenging experiences in 2027, which is when we move into the archetype of justice, when we face the undeniable outcome of what we're creating or have created or have done to self, other, and world. In fact, many of us will not make it to 2027 if we don't get very honest about what we see in the mirror of ourselves and our lives right now. Remember, I am a therapist. I've been working with people for 42 years in January. And I've been working with the study of the psyche and healing, and I have seen over and over again what happens to people that don't take responsibility for their healing or their addictions, and it's not pretty. Tarot 10 offers a means of and inspiration to self-reflection. Remember, that's one of the qualities of the soul. Introspection, meditation, honest self-review. The symbols of this archetype show you where to look into yourself, your life, and your relationships, and what we each contribute to the progressively greater whole of we and all. So we'll start with the central symbols of the mirror or mandala, which is mandala means an image in a circle. And so what we're going to go through now is the inner circle and the outer circle, and then we'll progressively work through the rest of the symbols, because everything in a tarot card has deep significance. There's not one mark that doesn't mean something, and usually something deep. So the central image represents the consciousness compass, the compass of conscious evolution and involution. So evolution means little to big, to evolve your consciousness from little to big. Involution is the involution of the soul, big to little, or an avatar such as Babaji, Sri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda, Jesus, if you want to go with that one, all of them, those great spirits that come down into the confines of a body to help others. That's involution. The compass of conscious evolution and involution, motivation and time to promote direction in cycles that inspire inner development, spiritual growth, and self-realization. So the compass is all about finding direction and using the archetypes of space, time, and movement to create consciousness. The symbols in the central circle emerge from alchemy. So in the very inner circle that you see here, these symbols emerge from alchemy. These symbols represent the exchange and interplay of energy, which includes information and frequency that generate the movement of life or the generation of life force. Now, if you look up the word qi in a Chinese to English dictionary, qi actually translates to steam in English. So we need to be aware of what it takes to make steam. It takes 4 elements, which are represented, as you will see, by the symbols in the corners of the card, which are also astrological symbols. What's the point? To make steam, you have to have earth, a pot, something to hold it in, a clay, steel pot, etc. You have to have water, you have to have fire to heat it, and you have to have air to carry it into the atmosphere, or you can't have steam. If you have too much fire relative to the earth or the water, then you will melt the pot or evaporate the water too quickly. Without a long ado, those 4 elements must be kept in balance in order to create life force energy, which in many ways is like steam. In our outer circle of the mirror of mandala, which you see out here, this outer circle, you see the letters T-A-R-O, and if you come back to the top, you get T, which, as I said earlier, represents the royal road to self-realization. If you read the letters counterclockwise, you get Torah, which really, some of you are familiar with the Jewish Torah, means knowledge and law, which means the universe is governed by law, and understanding those laws means you gain knowledge. Reading from the R, so if you start at the R at the bottom, you get R-O-T-A, which represents internal motivation or the impetus of our spirit. If you read from the O counterclockwise, you get O-R-A-T, which means to speak your truth. So in a 10-year, we need to be aware that the most efficient path through the challenges of the world is the royal road, which correlates to the Tao. The Tao means the middle path, or not too much, not too little. We need to respect law and gain knowledge of universal laws and laws that will protect our sovereignty and each other from each other. And we also would be wise to tap into our heart to see what our soul's and our spirit's real internal motivation is. Otherwise, you're not going to follow your life path, which will lead to pain. And then it's very important for us all to speak our truth. The problem is, until you've done the purification of at least the first 9 stages of tarot, you're still confused about who you are. You're still out of touch with your soul. So what you speak of as your truth is really your programming. And this is one of the problems with religion. This is exactly why Shankara said no man can understand Scripture until he's enlightened, and when he's enlightened, he does not need Scripture. He being male and female. So it's one thing to speak your truth about something that you truly have wisdom about. But if you're speaking your truth as a dogma or as a means of making other people wrong, but you still haven't reached a level of enlightenment where you know what truth is and can speak from your heart, then you're probably just going to have to face the mirror quite heavily in 2026. Now, if we look at the central symbols of the mandala there, you see Hebrew letters in the outer ring, which represent Yod, He, Vav, He, or the Aramaic equivalent, which is said to be the language that Jesus spoke of, IHVH. This ancient code tells us of eternal truths about life, so let's explore these meanings of Yod, He, Vav, He. Now, it's spelled different ways, so don't write me nasty emails saying I spelled it wrong, because I can put a bunch of books on your table and right out of my library and show you different spellings. Okay, so the code of Yod, He, Vav, He, Yod, He, Vav, He, the Yod represents the active principle preeminent. It means spirit moving through everything. It correlates to the ego because that's where our self-perception is and has a numerical value of 10. The He represents the passive principle preeminent. That's the feminine. So you have the active yang, the passive yin, and that's the feminine principle. That's water. Is the water and earth, by the way, are passive elements. They're feminine. Fire and air are masculine and active or volatile elements in alchemy. They move the water and the earth, or the feminine. So far we have the active principle, the passive principle, the Va, the median letter, the link which unites the active and passive, the affinity between the ego and the non-ego. So the ego is your programmed sense of self. The non-ego is really the fool or God within you, which has a numerical value of 6. The second He marks the passage from one world to another, the transition, complete being, comprising the one absolute unity, the 3 letters which comprise it, being ego, representing ego, non-ego, and affinity. It indicates the passage from the noumenal, real, such as the archetypal world, to the phenomenal or temporary or reciprocal. To understand that, just study the allegory of Plato's cave. And it serves as the means of ascension from one scale to another, which is what happens each time your consciousness evolves through the archetypes of the tarot and ultimately through the gate of Tarot 21, means you have graduated out of the need to be in such a highly polarized physical reality, or Earth School, where we still do nasty things to each other and act like kids with our dangerous toys. Now note that when you look at those numerical values as expressed up here, 10 plus 5 plus 6 equals 21, which is the 21 major arcana of the Journey of the Fool, and it's also the 21 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and there's a lot of correlations in tarot. Now, we're going to look now at the 4 symbols in the corners of the card which are related to astrology and alchemy. So the lower right symbol here is the lion that is Leo, the archetype of Leo in astrology, the birth sign Leo, which represents the fire element. Fire in alchemy represents desire. God clearly desires to experience love and relationship, or life would not exist. So fire symbolizes desire. Divine fire is both creative and destructive, and that is the forces that create life. So we have to use fire intelligently, or it becomes dangerously destructive, as the last year of fires that seem to be magically appearing everywhere. Consciousness maintains the balance of the creative and destructive elements of fire. Fire here represents God's desire to know itself. So the Sri Yantra, which is another geometric symbol for zero, manifests itself in spirit that takes the shape and form of archetypes that ultimately embody themselves through the elements. So this is my artist's rendition of God dreaming itself into existence as we know it through life. In 2026, we have to face the consequences of playing with and being unconscious of how humanity is using the powers of fire. What is a war weapon? An explosion, guns, bombs, torpedoes, missiles. Continuing with fire, as I said, fire represents desire, and God clearly desires to experience love or life would not exist. Leo represents the sun, the heart, and the ego. What desires are feeding your heart or our heart collectively and moving us toward unity and a deeper connection to life, nature, and a willingness to engage the responsibilities of love is a question we need to ask ourselves now as we enter 2026. The sun gives light unconditionally, signifying that the ego purified of the false self shines its love light to all as the silent teacher and the silent lover. So the more purified we become and the more aligned with our true self we are, the more we express God's unconditional love. The journey to this state of being is the royal road expressed in tarot. Now, fire depends on earth to feed it. Earth grows trees and plants and things that we can burn. Water to grow fuel to feed it so it doesn't destroy life. So we have to have water to control the fire. We have to have water to feed life that feeds the fire. You have to have something to burn. And if we don't have enough water to control fire, then fire will eat everything alive. And we need air to feed it so we can live. So just think of your own body. You have to breathe to oxidize your metabolism or you can't live. We have to have water to create connection in the body and to carry nutrition in and waste out. We have to have water to lubricate. So without a long explanation, those four elements, as I said when I talked about steam, have to be kept in balance. And if the air, water, and earth elements are not balanced, then fire cannot be balanced. If fire is excessive, it will have a negative effect on air, water, and earth. If fire, the great transformer, is not consciously managed, it symbolizes egocentrism, pathology, and the transformation of life to death, which is Tarot 13. Now, the symbol in the upper left represents the air element, the zodiac sign Aquarius, and it represents the mental plane of vibration in alchemy or all things mind. So, as I said, air in alchemy represents the vibration of the mental plane. Mind is symbolized by the sword. You see the Sphinx carrying a sword. We'll look at that in a bit. Remember, the mind is a cutter. You can't conceptualize the whole of God or even the world without some way to identify it. If there's a crowd of people and you're trying to point somebody out to a friend, if they say, well, where's your friend? There, and point to a whole crowd, they can't see them. So you say, oh, that's my friend over there. See the guy wearing the red jacket with white stripes and the blue pants and the cool hat? Oh, yes, there he is. So mind, by definition, is a cutter. And that's why in tarot it's symbolized by the sword. And like a sword, it can be used to defend, protect, or even hunt and feed yourself, or it can be used to injure and kill. Wholeness cannot be perceived by the mind, only ideas. So in 2026, we must carefully consider what ideas and beliefs are and are not life affirmative, because a lot of the ideas and beliefs that we still carry especially, as I'll show you later, religious ideas have turned out to be deadly. Remember, the number one cause of war throughout history to this very day is religious differences in the beliefs about what God is and what God wants. So we have to be very careful with ideas about God. Air also represents breath, breathing, spirit. Life itself must breathe or it dies. Breathing can be used to control the mind, and the mind can be used to control breathing. In 2026, we must make careful decisions regarding ideas such as geoengineering that are stopping life and humanity from breathing together. In 2026, if we don't individually and collectively clear the air, we will continue to be misled by ideas and beliefs that segregate and divide us from each other and from nature, or Gaia, Mother Earth. In 2026, we must awaken to the fact that the mind is God to the body. The body enacts mind even at the expense of its own ability to balance, heal, and live. So our thoughts and beliefs lead to behaviors that can be very destructive to the body. You could say that the journey through the tarot archetypes and all spiritual development is really just a journey from the head to the heart. Now, in the upper right, we have the eagle, which is the Scorpio, and it relates to water and the emotional plane. Water is an ancient symbol for both universal consciousness and the unconscious. In tarot, wherever you see water, it relates to the unconscious unless it's being held and poured like you see in Tarot 17, the star. So that means if it's being poured, it means consciousness. If it's being stood in, or it's in a river or a lake or in a background, it means the unconscious. Water is the great connector and carrier of life force. Water symbolizes emotion, values, and the feeling function of consciousness, which we're dangerously out of touch with. The entire Western culture is so trapped in its head, it is completely void of its feeling function of consciousness as a stereotype type overview of the conundrum of the West. Water is nature's most effective solvent for detoxification, but we must be conscious that if we don't work to purify our waters individually and collectively, or water at all levels becomes saturated with the toxicity of ideas, beliefs, fears, insecurities, illusions, and toxins, we will continue to lose connection to ourself, others, nature, and life itself, inviting a personal and collective catastrophe. Now we get to the lower left symbol, which is the bull. That's the birth sign or the zodiac sign Taurus. It represents the earth element in the physical plane. Earth in geometry and alchemy is represented by a square or a cube and represents embodiment, place, home, containment, and is the foundation for life on earth. In 2026, we must all become conscious of how egos relate to earth in all aspects that relate to life. Earth is significant as an element because unlike the other elements, earth carries fire, air, and water within it to support life. Anything that disrupts the delicate balance of the elements within earth leads to disasters such as flooding and dehydration, suffocation of life, overheating and inflammation, cracking, drying, and crumbling, and dust. In 2026, if we don't protect the soils, convert to organic and biodynamic and regenerative farming, we'll not only reach the tipping point with poison accumulation in the soil, water, and air, life itself will suffer from excessive toxicity and the loss of topsoil. Without restoring the topsoil worldwide, we'll continue to see chronic diseases in children and people of all ages resulting from chronic malnutrition. MAHA, Make America Healthy, must become Make the World Healthy again. In 2026, if we don't realize that excessive earth relates directly to material possessions, curb consumerism, materialism, scientocracy, and techno-fascism, we will reach the tipping point at which extraction of the earth's resources overexceeds the earth's regenerative capacity. We must remember dead doctors don't lie. Doctors have a lifespan about 10 years less than the average human being, yet they're supposed to be the teachers of health. We've got PhDs in everything that still don't understand how to eat, how to exercise, how to breathe, and have very little consciousness as to the belief systems that they embody. And oftentimes, PhD stands for progressive head death, or piled higher and deeper. So our whole education system has led us into an illusion that doctors are the great teachers, and the word doctor in Latin means teacher. The blue background on the tarot number 10 represents the 5th chakra in the chakra system, which is correlated to mind, atmosphere, ether, Akasha, the Akashic records, which is the memory of life not only on Earth but throughout the universe. The books that you see, each of those 4 symbols holding on to, represent acquiring knowledge to support you in each stage of your development, which those books represent the book of life. The Anubis, which is the dog-faced god of Egypt, here, the little red character, is the being who weighed the souls of the dead. He is thought of as a positive integrative factor in Egyptian thought. In some tarot decks, he is seen as the good guy rising to the top of the wheel. But he's also recognized as the trickster or the jackal archetype. Anybody who's telling you something's good that's not good, or selling you something that isn't truly what they're telling you it is, or a politician that lies constantly, those are the jackal archetype or the trickster. The trickster also represents the false ego, temptation, and is the generator of illusions. So this relates to the archetype of Lucifer. The generator of illusions relates to Narcissus and AI. Now, when you look at the Wheel of Fortune archetype card there, notice all the 4 symbols of the zodiac are sitting on clouds. Clouds represent not being clear, the buying into illusions, being programmed or brainwashed. Clouds of unknowing, not being able to see through something to the truth. That's why we're on this journey depicted by the tarot, is to clear the clouds, to heal the false ego, and to get past religious ideas about God that lead to war, division, segregation, separation, infighting, etc. The snake represents life force energy, or kundalini, which is what yoga is a science of doing, is bringing that life force energy up through the chakras to the pineal gland, where you become one with all that is and realize the answer to the question, who am I? It also relates to solar light and the stages of development depicted in Tarot 1 through 10, and it also represents the stages of a process leading from 1 through to 10, the beginning of a cycle. So the snake is showing you that there is, each wave represents a step in a cycle of development. And then we have Om, and here you see the word rest. Remember, ah, I awaken, ooh, I'm dreaming, I'm falling asleep, rest, end of cycle. Right now, we should all be resting from the busyness of life that's stopping us from introspection, purification, healing, and effectively redreaming, or we're just going to carry all of our programming, our biases, our bad habits, our confusion, our toxicity, our false ego or false self into the next cycle. And I honestly don't know how far we're going to get with the level of technology we're using today if we don't evolve to the point where we're heart guided, and that the head is listening to the heart, and that we realize we're all in this together, regardless of race, color, or creed. We need to support each other. Now we get into some very interesting and deep symbolism. On top of the wheel here, the compass of consciousness, you see the Sphinx holding a sword. Sphinx represents consciousness and truths to be reached. The sword represents the mind and the riddles and paradoxes of life. Mythologically speaking, when confronted by the Sphinx, you will be given a riddle. If you do not solve the riddle, the Sphinx will kill you. So we are all in a 10-year, as this archetype shows you, being confronted by the Sphinx. And if we do not solve the riddle it's presenting to us, which simply stated could be answering the question, who am I? Once you answer that question, then a lot of these problems disappear and your heart opens. So what are the riddles the Sphinx confronts us with in 2026? Well, most of you have heard of the 7 deadly sins, which are pride, envy, gluttony, sloth, lust, avarice, and wrath. The Sphinx is confronting us and warning us that we nor the world can handle more of those 7 deadly sins, and that we must become virtuous. So the redeeming virtues are prudence, justice, temperance, which is tarot 14, justice is tarot 11, fortitude, which is in many of the tarot, but strength number 8, temperance is also fortitude, and we have faith, hope, and charity. Now, there's different ways of looking at this, but the point is that these negative qualities are related to vices, which are counterbalanced by virtues. So this is, again, one of the riddles that the Sphinx is presenting us with in 2026. The next is we must remember the archetype from which all archetypes emerge, which is the most fundamental. So when it comes to religion, we've got to be careful about big daddies in the sky, because the Abrahamic religions keep us in the child archetype. There's always an authority figure to bow down to be subservient to, and God is often perceived as some old man in the sky, and all you got to do is read the Old Testament and the Bible to see just how that works out. Not that I'm saying that religions are not, that they're all bad, but you have to have enough depth and wisdom and adult maturity to discern what is and isn't something that should be imported into your actual belief system in daily life, or you can get lost. So when it comes to our ideas and beliefs and practices with religion, we must remember what the accountability ladder says. When you're a child or acting out the victim or the saboteur, you're likely to be unaware, blame others, make excuses, and wait and hope for God or Jesus or some Savior to rescue you. But we must, by the demand of the Sphinx, acknowledge reality. What is reality? It's what's happening right now. It's everything that supports your ability to live. And it's what's happening even when you're not looking. We must own our situation personally and collectively. We must find solutions personally and collectively. We must get on with it and become adult spiritual warriors and seek new successes for ourselves and for each other and for the planet. When it comes to religion, the most important question to ask is not what some scripture says, but what would love do now? Because most religion is trapped in people's heads. It's just memorization and belief. The danger of belief is as soon as you believe something, you stop asking questions, which is why James Carse, the author of the book Finite Infinite Games, also wrote an excellent book called The Religious Case Against Belief, in which he made it very, very clear that to believe is actually to abort the process of religion, which is the process of becoming aware of who and what you really are and what God really is, which is what yoga is all about, even though yoga is not a religion. Remember that true religion is the life we lead, not the creed we profess. So once again, when it comes to all aspects of religion, we must climb the accountability ladder from child, victim, and saboteur to adult and spiritual warrior, or we may wipe each other out, because once religion has the access to atomic weapons. And if you remember, 85% of all people on the planet have religious affiliation, including people in government. How many times have you heard presidents use the word God to justify themselves, and dictators doing the same or similar things? We need to be very, very conscious of religion. There is only one God, and that's why I spell that in all caps. And that God cannot be known through the mind. It can only be known through the heart. So as we enter 2026, the Sphinx's riddle is to ask you, do you realize that you come from God? And what is it that you're going to do for God and with God? Now, that's got capital G, little o, little d, because that's the God that you can believe in. That's the God you can embody. That which is unconditional, we can't wrap anything around it. We can just do our best to act as loving as we can. So, what are we going to do with God and for God, and say, and as God? Because God is all that is. There's nothing here but God, which is another thing that is shocking, that it takes so long for people to figure out. If God is the source of everything, then God is everything. That's why the myth of Shakti and Shiva is so beautiful. Then we've got to look at the issue of God and politics. In most countries, it really runs more like a mafia than it does a democracy or anything that reflects freedom and independence. The government is supposed to be by the people, for the people, but it's become by the large corporations and tyrants, for the large corporations and tyrants. So we've got to look carefully at what it means to be a member of a government. And we've all got to do our best to contribute any way that we can. When it comes to governing ourselves, which is where it all begins, we've got to climb the accountability ladder. We also have to look at the idea of God as war. War is extremely expensive and destructive, and when you look at the cost of war and what we could be doing with that money to heal the planet and restore topsoils and feed the world population and bring nutrition back to the families and the children. The problem is that war is a very dangerous industry that's highly profitable to a very few people, and it is the greatest consumer of taxpayers' dollars probably in every country in the world. And for what? Then we got to look at the concept of God as games. We must be conscious that in order for us to survive and grow and thrive together, we must become infinite game players. And we need to get away from the concept of winners and losers and embrace the concept of winners and learners, so that we inspire each other to grow and get better at the only game that really matters, which is the game of life. So we must start taking accountability for how we engage all aspects of gaming, top to bottom. Then we have to look at the illusion of God as a digital reality and the universe as a simulation. These are some very attractive ideas. I've studied Rizwan Verk's The Simulation Hypothesis. I'm probably halfway through his multiverse book. And it's a very compelling argument. But from a spiritual perspective, I could give many reasons why that conception is really just a projection of a technocratic mindset, or a mindset that is scientific but not holistic, which is not good science. You know, we're playing some very, very dangerous games with digital technology. And when your God becomes zeros and ones in digital technology, then you lose touch with the fact that the digital reality doesn't manage 4 elements that support life. Trees and food in a digital reality don't have to be harvested and grown. Bodies in a digital reality don't have cells to replace and relationships that make a difference in how we live. We're dangerously caught up in games and digital reality, and we're losing touch with life. We're losing touch with Mother Nature. Everything's becoming an illusion. We're losing touch with the truth. AI is commonly used to avoid the spiritual work and practical work of confronting the mystery. AI provides logical conclusions, yet without the mystery, there is no soul. In other words, without the mystery of God, if AI tells you everything, then you believe it. It takes the mystery out of almost everything, especially God. Without soul, we lose our passion for love, creativity, poetry, and even taboo, because in logic, there's always a conclusion. That's the problem with religion. They give you conclusions and turn symbols into signs, and you believe it, and then you stop asking questions, and that leaves you in the child archetype and very easy to manipulate and control. Until AI can experience orgasm, it is not conscious. You should consider that. If you think your AI helper is conscious, then stand with it in the sun and ask it to tell you what the sun feels like. Then compare your experience as the sun tantalizes your being with what AI says it experiences, and the difference between your experience and AI's will explain the difference of being conscious versus not conscious. The conference that I really recommend, which fortunately for everybody is now free, is The Soul and the Machine, Depth Psychology, Myth, and Artificial Intelligence. One of my favorite presenters was a writer for Marvel Comics, and he was a very deep guy. I could really see how well studied he was and how it is that Marvel's making these very successful movies with guys like him writing comics and these types of movies. This is one of the best conferences I've ever experienced in a very long time, and hats off to all the presenters. They were phenomenal, and this will make you think very deeply about AI on many levels. Then we must remember that we've got to protect our children's minds and their natural connection to life. Children can see beyond the veil of the material world. As Osho said, all children are born God and the parents beat it out of them. We've got to be conscious of that. We've got to protect our children. We've got to protect them from being programmed into belief systems that are segregating us and separating us from each other and confusing us about what love's really all about. If you only love people of your own color or your own religion, then you still are really at a very low level of consciousness. So we need to let the children have a beautiful childhood and educate them in ways that helps them navigate life so that they can be the future we need. And we need to remember that everything we do, we should be thinking 7 generations ahead. Point being is, the Sphinx is presenting us with a riddle, and the riddle is, who are your children? Do you love them? And what would love do now? Because your future depends on it. We must remember that it is a mystery. Anybody that tells you what God wants or what God demands is very confused, because you cannot know what God wants or what God is or what God demands until you become God. And when you become God, there's no you to know anything. And if you are God, then you're infinite. You know everything there is to know. You have everything there is to have, and therefore there's nothing to think about. So there is no subject-object. So we must be very careful with religious beliefs and scriptures, because most of the people in the world are very unconscious and do not know how to interpret Scripture beyond literal or ethnocentric, which means my group against your group. The highest forms of scriptural interpretation are allegorical and inspirational, but it takes an enlightened person to really explain to you what these scriptures mean. And those scriptures lead to more war than they do love and connection and beauty and good in the world. So the Sphinx is saying, there's a riddle before you. Does your Imago Dei create you, or do you create it? When it comes to the Imago Dei or God image, integrating and expanding the Imago Dei can be achieved at the moment we ourselves change in relationship to the new imagination and inner experiences we cultivate through living awareness. We have to reimagine God in a much more beautiful, loving way. If we don't, the pain teacher will show up. To enlarge our conception of an absolute God or a relative personal God is to grow ourselves and become greater in consciousness, as the limits of who we imagine we are and what we imagine we are capable of expands, our capacity to love ourselves, I, others, we, and the world evolves. Our own spiritual evolution is a harmonizing and stabilizing force for all beings in nature and all people, because it's all an expression of us. The sacred impulse in the pulse, something greater than ourselves, is incarnating through us as it reveals itself to us. We are truly made in the image of God, while at the same time, our image of God makes us. And that's why we've got to be very discerning about beliefs and religious programming, and even anti-religious programming, which is just as dangerous. There's a reason human beings have always had a thirst and a quest for God, which is ultimately love. Love is the verb of God. The golden rule is what should be written over and over again, because if we practice that, we'd have a chance of living and loving and creating something beautiful for our children and our future and the planet. When we look at all the 10 cards, which have the same significance, but they relate to the elements, so here you have wands, which is the use of fire and power in relationship to self and others, swords, mind, cups, love, coins, the earth. So 10 of wands represents the end of the cycle and the beginning of a new, holding on to your personal power and redreaming. So we're now concluding a cycle. In 2025, those wands will be standing on their own. They represent the wisdom that we have gained through the last 10-year cycle and the potential for growth that we now carry. 10 of Swords represents completing a difficult cycle, change and renewal, letting go of past beliefs and behaviors that do not serve you or everybody. Cups, 10 of Cups represents happiness, fulfillment, and a completed cycle. And remember, each of these cards have their reverse, the opposite polarity. So this is if we're engaging them in a positive way. So all of them can be reversed. If we're not conscious, then we will see our reversal in the mirror. Finally, 10 of Coins represents material success and asking the question, what legacy are we leaving behind for the children and the future generations to come with how we use money and material possessions? It represents the culmination of your life's efforts, money, energy, and exchange, and it means we need to be aware, as I said, of future generations. Now, my homework assignment for my Spirit Gym students included to review what we've covered with regard to the Wheel of Fortune, look at each of the symbols and their meanings, and ask your highest self, that part of you which knows, or your heart, what specifically applies to you at this time. Look at your life. What are your relationships, finances, health, and circumstances mirroring back to you? Where can you choose to live more dream affirmatively? That's a question we should all ask ourselves every day. Where can you use your dreaming abilities, mind, and body actions more life affirmatively? In other words, what can you do tangibly to make the world a better place for all living beings? Ask your highest self or your heart where you can focus for optimal spiritual development and evolution at this time in your life. In my system of alchemy, Chek Life Process Alchemy, which I recently shared on a podcast I did on integrated health, we have stages of development: blackening, yellow or light, green integration, and red gold, which means mastery. So we can all look into our own lives and our own relationships and just ask, where are the problems that we're dealing with? What are they? That almost always indicates where we're unconscious, or just look at where our judgments against self and other are, and that shows you where your shadow is hiding. And then we can become conscious and aware of how the problem's affecting our ability to create our dreams and achieve our goals, and wake up, clean up, grow up, and show up together, and make a plan. Make your own personal plan, or see somebody skilled, like a Chek trained professional that knows how to do a proper analysis for you. And the road to integration is practicing the solution that the plan is giving you the means to do. And if we do that with practice, then we develop mastery and unconscious competency, so our new values and ways of relating aren't things we have to think about anymore. We just don't support destruction of nature. We don't support the use of our taxes for unnecessary wars. We have to wake up, clean up, grow up, and show up. And this is a simple path for how to do it that anybody can use. What's the problem? How's the problem affecting your dream? And what can you do to make improvements? What is your commitment to practicing that? And are you committed to mastery, so you can be a good example for others and be the silent teacher and the silent lover the world needs now? Remember, choosing not to choose is choosing in 2026, as the Sphinx warns you, is a bad idea to not choose with regard to all the things we've discussed here. We all have the option to do what we love to do. We all should at this point know what we need to do. All we got to do is get naked in the mirror, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, and look at our relationships and look at what our life is mirroring back to us. And then we've got what we're willing and able to do. There might be a lot of things we need to do, but we're not willing or able to do it. Oftentimes it's willing. But I find that when we're doing something that's the best we can do, then we produce joy. And joy is very inspirational. If you just ask yourself every day, what would love do now? And use your heart to feel what you know, we can all do that together and change the world. Without love, this is what people's body looks like, and that symbolizes the imbalance in the chakra system, which are the psychophysical themes that this is the means by which the psyche, the spirit and the soul integrate itself into a physical body. But if we do what we love to do, what we need to do, and what we're willing and able to do on a daily basis, then we'll bring ourselves into harmony and balance. And when our bodies are healthy, our brains are healthy, and we're creative, and we're open-minded, and we're not trapped in religious dogmas or scientific materialism or techno-fascism or scientism, then we can bring harmony back to life and to each other and make the world a better place. And that's my dream, and that's why I devote myself to my podcast, to Spirit Gym, to the Chek Institute, and to everything I've devoted my life to. And I hope all of you can see the importance of all of us getting involved at this point. So I'll close by saying thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm very excited for the new year. We all have an amazing opportunity to create harmony within ourselves and our relationships with each other and with Mother Nature in 2026. If you enjoyed the concepts I shared in this podcast, you'll surely find my Spirit Gym memberships an amazing growth opportunity, and enjoy the amazing community of Spirit Gym practitioners, which are just mind-blowing. I feel so blessed every day. I've got such amazing students and people that help me and inspire me to grow every day and give me a reason to really support them because they're the people that are making the change, along with a lot of others. If you're interested in what I offer in my Spirit Gym program, which synthesizes my 15-volume book set in 75 lessons called the Master Key Lessons for over 82 hours of training, and then we have all the weekly sanghas that are recorded and more. You can go to myspiritgym.com. I'd like to thank Vicky Dye again for all the amazing art and diagrams she did for my 15-volume book set. She's still working with me on them. Thank you to my amazing sponsors of the podcast and each of you for being the change the world needs now. Lots of love. Aho, great spirit. Thank you, thank you. If you joined me for this long, I know you're committed, even if you don't like what I'm saying. There's something in you calling you forward, so use your heart to feel what you know. And I'll look forward to having an amazing podcast for you next week. Lots of love.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek. Check out the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast to access the PDF accompaniment to this episode. Make sure to follow Paul on social media, Instagram and TikTok at paul.chek, X at Paul Chek, and his YouTube channel, youtube.com/Paul Chek Live. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube. And finally, please support our sponsors, Chek Institute, Organifi, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, Peak Life, and Correct, as their support of this podcast helps us to keep bringing new episodes to you.